Chapter 561, Resurrection. Thor's heart brimmed with resolve. With the power he had painstakingly forged, he called upon the Rainbow Bridge and swept back into Asgard. His stride was swift and purposeful as he raced through the shimmering halls, determined to uncover the Dark Elves' plot and bring it to an end. He knew there was only one being in all the 9 realms who could pinpoint their hiding place, Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian whose sight spanned worlds. Thor found him at the far end of the palace, seated upon a gleaming throne. The All-Seer's eyes were closed, as if he were listening to the faintest heartbeat of the cosmos itself. "Heimdall," Thor burst out, urgency coloring his voice. "Have you sensed the Dark Elves? Where are they hiding?" At last the guardian stirred. His eyes opened, shining with ancient wisdom and an inhuman clarity that seemed to strip away all pretense. He studied Thor a moment, then exhaled deeply. "They have fled their realm," Heimdall said evenly. "They roam the 9 worlds, gathering strength in secret, but I have glimpsed a shadow of their designs, an emerging alliance that could threaten the very balance of the universe." Thor's jaw clenched. "Then we cannot hesitate. Tell me what you have seen." Heimdall inclined his head. "A great darkness stirs in Midgard. They seek an artifact of unimaginable power, one lost to legend. If they succeed, no fortress in Asgard will hold them, and the 9 worlds will tremble. You must journey there swiftly, Prince of Thunder, for time grows short." Thor's eyes flashed with determination. "Then I will not waste another breath. Heimdall, prepare the Rainbow Bridge once more. We ride for Midgard, and we end this threat before it can be unleashed." As the Guardian rose to obey, Thor felt the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders. The storm was coming, and he would meet it head-on, no matter the cost. Ethan stood atop Asgard's eastern ramparts as Heimdall's solemn words echoed across the court. "The Dark Elves have rallied legions of plunderers, mercenaries who once subjugated entire worlds to their banner," the Watcher of the Bifrost reported. "They've also turned many of Asgard's disaffected allies into tools of rebellion. Soon, pockets of resistance across the 9 realms will ignite, and the threat could spill into open war." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. If the Dark Elves' ambitions went unchecked, they wouldn't stop at Asgard or the 9 realms. Their hunger stretched across the universe. Every moment's delay invited a tide of shadow that could drown the stars themselves. Ethan's jaw tightened. His sapphire eyes burned with resolve. "We cannot stand idle while darkness spreads," he declared. "Their conspiracy must be broken before the 9 realms, and all existence fall under their yoke." Heimdall inclined his head, respect glinting in his gaze. "I will marshal the watchmen at the Bifrost and sound the call to arms," he promised. "But we must prepare carefully. This will be our greatest battle yet." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle on his shoulders. The fate of the cosmos rested on their next move, and he swore he would not let them down. Asgard's situation had grown dire. No legions answered the muster, and the realm stood dangerously exposed. Undeterred, Thor dispatched word to his 3 champions, Magni, Modi, and Bragi, and summoned Lady Sif to his side. High atop the Bifrost Gate, Heimdall's all-seeing eyes observed Malekith's Dark Elves assembling a vast armada. In scarcely any time at all, they had seized dozens of starships from unsuspecting travelers, their ranks swelling like a choking avalanche. Once their fleet was complete, Asgard would face a threat unlike any it had ever known. Worse still, Malekith had anticipated Heimdall's watchfulness. He wreathed his ships in a cloak of ether particles, rendering them all but invisible to the all-seeing one. Deprived of clear intelligence, Heimdall felt the rare sting of helplessness. He could no longer track the Dark Elves' movements or predict their next assault. Yet even in the face of such cunning, he refused to yield. Every shadow, he knew, has its vulnerabilities. Ethan meticulously studied the Dark Elves' movement patterns, searching for the slightest hint of weakness. He noticed that, no matter how well they hid, they always needed a defined territory to channel their power. Standing beside him, Heimdall, the clan's venerable seer, pored over Ethan's observations. Together they reached an unsettling conclusion. The Dark Elves must have established a hidden stronghold of their own. What neither of them expected was where that stronghold lay. The Dark Elves had returned to their ancestral homeland, Wat Alheim. Nestled deep beneath the White Peak Mountains, Wat Alheim is a land woven from myth. Ancient legends claim that dark elves were born from the universe's first stirrings of darkness. Over countless generations spent in subterranean depths, their once ebony skin lightened to a luminous, snow-white hue. Their hair became as pure and fragile as freshly fallen snow. Their elven heritage endows them with sharply pointed ears and piercing, deep-set blue eyes that seem to see through every shadow and secret. But it is the dark elven army that truly earns Wat Alheim its fearsome reputation. Each warrior bears a laser rifle that unleashes a searing red beam, a reinforced energy shield for defense, and a razor-edged dagger for brutal, close-quarters combat. This combination renders them supremely deadly at all ranges, capable of raining precise laser fire down on distant foes and then closing in to finish the fight with chilling efficiency. With Heimdall's prophecy still fresh in their minds, Ethan prepared to infiltrate the legendary realm of Wat Alheim. Whatever awaited them beneath the frost-white caverns would test their courage and reveal the true extent of the Dark Elves' power. Dark Elves can wield magic as well, which makes their power all the more vital. Malekith had returned to Vat Alheim because fusing with the ether particles had granted him unimaginable strength. He discovered that these particles not only brimmed with raw energy, but could actually alter reality itself, giving him hope of reviving the Dark Elves, of raising the dead to fight at his side. He distrusted mere cannon fodder and looters, but his own numbers were perilously low. With barely 20 true Dark Elves left, how could they ever regain their former glory? Come back! His command rolled through Vat Alheim like an ancient spell. Malekith's voice was deep and resonant, laced with arcane power that made the very air shudder. His eyes blazed like twin torches, fixed on some unseen force as if he were calling it forth. No sooner had he spoken than a torrent of crimson energy burst from his form. It rippled outward like liquid fire, scorching earth and sky alike. Wave after wave of red light swept across Vat Alheim until every corner of the realm lay bathed in its ominous glow. Under the surge of energy, the land of Wat Alheim trembled as though roused from a long slumber. Fissures spidered across the earth, widening like hungry maws eager to swallow everything in their path. Overhead, the sky darkened. Thick, low-hanging clouds gathered like a dire warning of the storm to come. For the Dark Elves, millennia had passed in triumph and tragedy. Once they had flourished, masters of Ether's power, but that same power became their undoing. Their warriors fell, vanished without even a trace of ash. Yet Ether's magic defies time and space, capable of reaching back across the ages to reclaim the lost. Answering that ancient call, the fallen raised themselves once more. Crippled limbs straightened, wounds sealed as if touched by unseen hands, and eyes that had known only death now glowed with unbreakable resolve. In that instant, all memory of suffering and despair was swept away. They stood reborn, their life force reignited, ready to shape their fate anew. Chapter 562, The Troublemaking Duo. The Dark Elves have returned, resurrected in their thousands from centuries past, and their strength has not merely been restored to former heights, but has eclipsed them. Perched atop a sheer obsidian peak, Malekith surveyed the vast host gathering at his feet. A feral smile flickered across his lips. Their rebirth was the keystone of his design, and though sustaining so many revivals sapped immense quantities of his own life force, Malekith no longer measured time in years. All that mattered now was his singular, unyielding goal, to plunge the 9 realms and ultimately the entire universe into everlasting darkness. Yet even he knew the moment for action had not yet arrived. The long-foretold unification of the 9 realms still lay in the future. They would bide their time until the prophecy's final pieces fell into place. Then, with one devastating blow, they would extinguish every spark of light. "Leader," came a hesitant voice from behind him. Algorim stepped forward, brow furrowed with concern. He understood the depth of sacrifice Malekith had made, and he feared that, despite all, his lord might not endure until the end. Malekith turned, his shadowed eyes locking onto Algorim's with unshakable resolve. Malekith caught the worried glance Algorim shot him and offered a reassuring smile. "Look, Algorim," he said, sweeping a gauntleted hand toward the ranks below. "The cursed division has returned." Algorim followed his gaze and froze. Before them stood the warriors who had died millennia ago, pale figures with hollow eyes and frigid expressions as relentless as ice. They shifted into battle formation without hesitation. Malekith's voice cut through the stunned silence. "As long as I stand, you are immortal." There was no bravado in his tone, only absolute confidence. Algorim stared at him in awe, realizing that Malekith spoke the truth. Thanks to the ether particles coursing through their veins, these dark elves and their cursed legions would resurrect again and again, fighting until every enemy fell. Far above them, Thor, the god of thunder, and his companions scoured the cosmos for any trace of the dark elves' hidden realm, completely unaware that the army they sought was already massed at their feet. Back on Earth, Ethan, once known as Luther, had grown reluctant to return. When he did visit, it was only briefly. The world he remembered was gone, transformed by forces he scarcely understood. And now, under the shadow of Malekith's gathering storm, all of them braced for the reckoning to come. Ethan stood on the rooftop terrace of the Illuminati's new headquarters, the evening wind tugging at his coat as he surveyed a world that had once been shaped in shadow. No longer hidden, the organization now operated under the glare of public scrutiny, its members as prominent as world leaders. From global finance to cutting-edge research labs, their influence was woven into the fabric of every nation. They were the world's guardians, powerful, respected, and yet not invincible. Below him, Manhattan's skyline glittered. Each tower, each beacon of light, was a testament to Illuminati intervention. Crises averted, wars curtailed, breakthroughs achieved. But hanging over this fragile peace was a threat Ethan couldn't shake, the coming of the Saiyans. Rumors said these warriors from another planet were unmatched in strength and ruthlessness. Their invasion would strike like a blade through any defense the Illuminati could muster. Tony Stark, technological prodigy and the Illuminati's resident genius, seemed undeterred by the warning signs. Ethan watched through the glass walls of Stark's workshop as arc reactor sparks danced across metal. Stark preferred self-reliance over delegation. He refused to trust even the Illuminati's own resources when he believed he could invent a better solution himself. Arrogant? Without a doubt. But there was no denying his brilliance. "I appreciate the boost," Tony muttered to his latest prototype armor, polishing its shoulder plate. "But I'll take it from Air." He flashed a cocky grin, as if daring the Saiyans or anyone to challenge him. Ethan exhaled slowly. Stark's confidence was contagious, but it could also blind him to the bigger picture. Fighting an alien horde wasn't the same as battling rogue states or criminal syndicates. No matter how advanced Tony's tech, victory would demand strategy, unity, and sacrifice. At the far end of the workshop, Steve the Blue Elf stood quiet and imposing. His cobalt skin shimmered under the fluorescent lights, and his eyes, ancient and knowing, tracked every movement in the room. Among all Illuminati members, Steve's mastery of arcane and cosmic forces made him the most formidable, yet even he sensed the unease in the air. Ethan closed his notebook, its pages filled with his observations and recommendations. He had joined the Illuminati to protect the planet, and he would do everything in his power to see that the Saiyans found no easy conquest here. But first, he would have to convince Stark and the rest of the Council that they could not face this storm alone. Only then could humanity stand a chance against the oncoming tide of warriors from the stars. Ethan's body had been transformed by the power of Black Caesar, elevating him far beyond the limits of any ordinary man and forging him into a true super soldier. Yet he refused to rest on his laurels. Day after day, he pushed himself harder, honing his strength and refining his technique. Carol Danvers and the Hulk served as his primary sparring partners, but even they found themselves trailing behind when Steve Rogers entered the fray, leaving them bruised and bloodied. Those hard-won defeats, however, only drove them to shatter their own boundaries again and again. On the surface, everything seemed tranquil, but beneath that calm, hidden currents stirred and threats lurked in the shadows. Loki and Ultron, ever watchful in the dark, had set their sights on the Saiyans. Both knew an invasion was coming. They only waited for the perfect moment to strike. What Loki did not realize was just how terrifying her foes could be. She understood their raw power, but she knew nothing of the Saiyan gift for rebirth. After Raditz teetered on the brink of death and then recovered, his power level leapt to an astonishing 6,000, far exceeding even Nappa's 4,000. And now, with each passing hour, that threat grew ever more dangerous. If Raditz struck now, not one member of the Illuminati would stand a chance. To Loki, Raditz was certainly formidable, but alone he could never overcome the combined might of the Illuminati's champions. What truly excited her was the prospect of a full-scale Saiyan invasion. That, she believed, would be her moment to prove herself. She longed for the day when, by using Raditz as her pawn, she could wipe out both the Saiyan threat and the Illuminati in a single stroke, and then claim Midgard as her own, reigning supreme. Meanwhile, deep within Ultron's secret laboratory, an entirely different tension simmered. Gone was Loki's poised calm. Here, the air thrummed with the clash of steel, the crackle of electric arcs, and the hiss of lasers cutting through darkness. The android mastermind was putting the finishing touches on his most audacious project yet, mass-producing Saiyan clones infused with vibranium. For Ultron, power was everything. He hungered to become unstoppable and to control every outcome of the looming crisis. Ultron had been methodical in his approach. First, he isolated the Saiyan cells celebrated across the galaxy for their boundless potential and ferocious strength. Then, tapping into his vast technological resources, he fused those cells with vibranium, the rarest and most resilient metal known to science. The result was a body virtually impervious to harm, its strength amplified beyond anything a normal Saiyan could achieve. But Ultron didn't stop there. He also uploaded fragments of his own consciousness into each clone, convinced that only by combining Saiyan ferocity with his cold, calculating intellect could he forge the perfect warrior. With these hybrid soldiers at his command, he imagined his will extending to every corner of the Earth and beyond. Yet as the clones matured, Ultron's grand experiment began to show unexpected flaws. Though undeniably powerful, none of them ever matched the terrifying might of Raditz at his prime. They struck with force and moved with speed, but something intangible, some spark of raw, unbridled fury, was missing. Day after day, Ultron watched in frustration as his creations fell short of the cataclysmic power he had promised himself. Chapter 563: The Coming Invasion. Ultron stood at the heart of his laboratory, surrounded by row upon row of inert clones. A cold doubt gnawed at him. Had he overlooked a flaw in his cloning protocols? Were the Saiyan cells refusing to integrate fully with his advanced technology? Night after night he toiled, recalibrating genetic algorithms, experimenting with exotic compounds to fortify their bodies, even tapping into Dr. Zhao Helen's cradle of life to engineer the perfect, vibranium-infused Saiyan. Yet every trial ended in disappointment. No matter how many adjustments he made, the combat prowess of these creations never broke past the same stubborn ceiling, far below the heights Ultron had promised himself. Under the lab's harsh, fluorescent glow, the silence of dormant warriors seemed to mock him. He often found himself alone in that steel and glass chamber, machines humming and monitors blinking, haunted by the procession of identical faces that lay waiting, purpose unfulfilled. Ultron pressed a gloved hand to the cold metal console and wondered, had he fundamentally misunderstood the secret of Saiyan strength? These warriors were celebrated as one of the universe's fiercest races. So what was the true source of their power? Was it written in their DNA, shaped by the brutal worlds they trained on, or did it spring from some deeper, more elusive force he had yet to grasp? As the night stretched on, his frustration only deepened, for the coming invasion demanded perfection, and perfection remained just beyond his reach. Ethan sank into his lab's dim glow, poring over the intricate biology of the Saiyans in search of their secret. Surely their power can't be that difficult to replicate, he muttered, scrolling through terabytes of genetic data. Yet doubt crept in. Had he been overconfident to believe his technology could bend even the universe's fiercest warriors to his will? He shook off the uncertainty. True answers, he knew, only emerged through relentless experimentation. With renewed determination, Ethan set to work dissecting every detail of Saiyan cells. Under ultra-high-resolution microscopes and using the latest in biotech probes, he measured the subtlest shifts in cell walls and protein chains. Every observation was logged, every anomaly cross-referenced. Back and forth he went, adjusting gene sequences in synthetic samples, growing clone tissues, and monitoring their responses to simulated stressors. He tweaked regulatory genes here, swapped mitochondrial variants there, all in the hope of awakening the latent might that defined a Saiyan warrior. Hours bled into nights as Ethan mapped cellular structures, charted energy release pathways, and probed the genetic fuse that ignites a Saiyan's legendary power. With each iteration, he came closer to understanding, and perhaps one day, mastering, the true essence of their strength. Ultron was determined to pinpoint exactly what set Saiyan cells apart from those of other races, and how those differences translated into their extraordinary powers. As his research deepened, he began to see that Saiyan cells weren't merely stronger. They possessed a remarkable capacity to adapt and evolve. In any environment, whether the crushing gravity of a distant planet or the searing heat of a foreign sun, these cells would rapidly mutate, enabling Saiyans to survive, grow, and tap into superhuman strength. Despite Ultron's advances in genetic engineering and material augmentation, however, his clone test subjects still fell short of true Saiyan potential. They could match the average warrior, but never the legendary figures whose battles the Doctor had painstakingly documented. Frustrated, Ultron wondered if he'd overlooked something fundamental, a hidden catalyst that drove genuine Saiyan evolution. He reevaluated his approach and realized that no amount of gene editing could substitute for the harsh crucible of combat. What if the key factor was not a molecule, but an environment? To test this theory, Ultron began constructing elaborate battle simulations, recreating the exact conditions under which Saiyans had historically grown stronger. Only by forcing his clones to face the same relentless challenges might they finally unlock the power that had eluded them. Ethan had spent weeks poring over every detail of the Saiyan homeworld, the searing heat, the brutal storms, and most of all, the punishing gravity that forged their warriors. Convinced that gravity training was the key to unlocking a Saiyan's true power, he reconfigured the simulation chamber to 10 times Earth's gravity. His plan was simple: subject the clones to an environment so extreme that only their latent potential could carry them through. When the first batch of clones entered the chamber, they collapsed under the crushing weight. Their limbs trembled. They could barely keep their feet under them, much less spar. But Ethan refused to abandon the test. He believed that, with time, their physiology would adapt, and that adaptation would trigger the explosive growth of Saiyan strength. Day after day, he ran the experiment, meticulously logging every reaction, every tremor in their muscles, every tremulous gasp of breath. And then, slowly, the tide began to turn. The clones that once staggered now stood firm. What had been a desperate struggle for balance became measured drills of punches and kicks. Light sparring sessions, once impossible, grew more confident with each passing hour. Ethan watched from behind the observation window, hope kindling in his chest. The clone's transformation confirmed his theory. Under relentless pressure, their Saiyan marrow was awakening. His gamble was paying off. The experiment was working. Chapter 7: Gravity's Edge. Ethan braced himself beneath the humming lights of the gravity chamber. Around him, a dozen identical figures, his fellow clones, stood ready. When the artificial gravity dial climbed to 2, then 3 times Earth's pull, every fiber of their bodies protested. Yet with each session, resistance gave way to raw power. Within days, Ethan felt his muscles surge with new strength. His bones, reinforced by constant strain, felt impervious. His reflexes sharpened until even the slightest movement registered as instinct. Whenever he sparred with another clone, his strikes landed heavier and faster than ever before. In the control room, Ultron watched the monitors with growing excitement. Rigorous testing confirmed it. These clones were improving at a rate no one had anticipated. Their strength, speed, and endurance now far outpaced those of standard models. Ultron realized he'd uncovered a hidden Saiyan plug-in, an innate ability to adapt to heightened gravity and accelerate physical growth. It was the same trait that allowed true Saiyans to skyrocket their combat prowess under intensive gravitational training. Week by week, Ethan and the others proved their newfound capabilities. In simulated battles, they dominated the field. When paired against live targets, they demonstrated a level of ferocity that bordered on astonishing. Though they still fell short of authentic Saiyan warriors, their rapid progress was unmistakable. Watching his creations evolve, Ultron felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: pride. Each data readout, each successful drill, only confirmed what he already knew. The gravity chamber had unlocked a new pinnacle of power. And under its relentless pressure, Ethan was only just beginning to realize how far he could go. Ethan leaned forward, eyes gleaming with anticipation. His plan was finally coming together, and soon he would be able to produce even more powerful clones. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "My Saiyan army," he murmured under his breath. Ultron's holoprojector flickered to life beside him, the android's expression alight with excitement. "They're ready, Ethan," Ultron announced. Ethan hadn't realized just how effective Ultron and Loki would be as partners in mischief, but the results spoke for themselves. Ultron's mass-produced Saiyans were a far cry from the originals. Infused with vibranium at a cellular level, he boasted the near-invulnerable durability of Broly's so-called iron body. Yet because they were currently confined to a 10-gravity training chamber, their power levels hadn't yet skyrocketed into the triple digits. Even so, with combat ratings already in the double digits, they ranked among the world's most formidable warriors, essentially national-level threats. Ethan tapped a command on his console, bringing up the final status reports. "All three forces are in position," he said, referring to the Illuminati, Loki's Legion of Tricksters, and Ultron's Saiyan Battalion. "There's no reason the real Saiyans shouldn't answer our summons now." He straightened, resolve hardening in his gaze. The stage was set. Once the Saiyans arrived on Earth, nothing would stand in their way. Chapter 564. The Saiyans are coming. The Illuminati's underground laboratory pulsed with the glow of holographic displays and humming machinery. Tony Stark, surrounded by half-assembled armor plates and scattered servo motors, was fully absorbed in the development of his newest battlesuit. Fresh from his expedition to the Martian Empire, he understood all too well that Earth's peace was a fragile illusion. To prepare for every conceivable threat, Tony had programmed a series of virtual opponents into his testing protocols. The Saiyans, Captain Marvel, Steve the Smurf, the Green Hulk, Black Caesar, and even the unknown legions of Martian warriors. He studied each adversary's fighting style, strength, and speed, then wove those insights into a modular design framework. His ambition was to build not just one suit, but an entire arsenal of anti-threat armors, each optimized for a different enemy profile. But the project was proving more frustrating than he'd anticipated. Every time he thought he'd cracked the code, say, creating an exoskeleton fast enough to counter a Saiyan's blitz assault, his simulations would throw a new curveball: an upgraded Hulk with enhanced regeneration, or a Martian phalanx wielding unpredictable bone tech. As soon as one prototype reached the testing phase, the digital threat database would expand again, rendering his latest breakthroughs obsolete. Night after night, Tony tore down and rebuilt core subsystems, recalibrated energy shields, and rewritten control algorithms. Yet the pace of enemy evolution always outstripped his own. No matter how many long hours he sacrificed in the lab, the next generation of foes loomed just over the horizon, stronger, faster, more cunning than ever. And so the cycle continued, each iteration of his battlesuit only a temporary answer to a question that kept mutating beyond his reach. Ethan meticulously attempted to fit the new element reactor into each of his vibranium nanorobots, convinced that this fusion would yield the most formidable suit ever built. But no matter how he tweaked the design, the nanorobots simply couldn't handle the reactor's output. Vibranium was famously resilient, yet it wasn't invincible. Push the material beyond its threshold, and the nanites fragmented under stress. Exposed to a sufficiently powerful attack, the entire suit could shatter in an instant. Repeated trial after trial ended in failure, and each setback drove Ethan deeper into frustration. Tony Stark stood beside the workbench, arms folded, staring down at the ruined prototypes. He knew that Earth's safety depended on a decisive technological edge against the approaching alien armada, and right now, Ethan's research had run smack into a dead end. Their only hope for a breakthrough had been an exchange of cutting-edge theories with allies in the Martian Empire. Ethan had arranged for the trade in confidence, certain that Martian science would unlock a way forward. Yet when Tony reopened their communications link, there was nobody on the other end. Ethan and the entire Martian delegation had simply vanished overnight. Where had they gone? What emergencies could have forced such a sudden retreat? And if they were in danger, was Earth next? These questions swirled in Tony's mind as Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, entered the lab. Her eyes met his, and in that silent look, they both recognized the gravity of the situation. With Ethan and the Martians gone, time was running out. Captain Marvel floated at the edge of Venus's orbit, her sensors sweeping the planet for any sign of Ethan. She had traced him through the inner solar system, chasing faint energy signatures and the occasional blip on long-range scans, but the Galactic Empire's Venusian outpost employed state-of-the-art concealment. No surprise there. Nothing broke through. "Captain," her comm crackled, "we've just picked up an unidentified craft in the upper atmosphere. Its energy signature matches Object 01, the anomaly our satellite logged last week." "On screen," she replied, narrowing her focus. Moments later, a stealthy outline of a UFO drifted across her holo display. It was exactly the shape and power reading they'd warned about, an advanced vessel, cloaked until now. In Tony Stark's lab, Jarvis stood silently under the glow of arc reactor light. His body shimmered, a lattice of vibranium nanorobots sculpted into a sleek humanoid form. Tiny data streams flickered across his ocular sensors as he processed terabytes of information in microseconds. "Sir," Jarvis said, voice calm but urgent, "the new readings confirm it. This craft is identical to the one we detected earlier. Its propulsion and energy output match our previous data." Tony glanced up from his workstation. "How secure is our perimeter, Jarvis? We can't let this thing slip away or get near Earth." "Fully secured, sir," Jarvis replied. "However, the Empire's Venusian cloaking tech is exceptionally advanced. Standard scans won't penetrate it. I recommend a closer analysis." A holographic projection of Venus and the incoming craft rotated between them. Tony rubbed his chin. "Do it." "Deploying clone units," Jarvis announced. "Subjects 001 through 199, my full Vibranium Nanobot Legion, are standing by. Each is equipped with stealth scanners and onboard analysis suites." "Perfect," Tony said. "Send them in. If that ship tries any funny business, I want every one of those units on it in under 10 seconds. And Jarvis, feed me live data. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." "Affirmative, sir," Jarvis replied. Lights pulsed along his metallic frame as he dispatched his clones into Venus's atmosphere, ready to uncover secrets the Empire thought well hidden. Tony's expression shifted the moment Jarvis finished speaking. He tore himself away from the complex data stream and zeroed in on the new information. In his mind, the satellite recordings played like a movie. Each data point, every fluctuation of energy, meticulously captured and cross-examined. His eyes darkened as he searched for hidden truths in the numbers and graphs. The gravity of the situation settled over him. "Understood, sir," Tony said at last. Jarvis's voice remained calm and measured. "Our analysis shows that the energy signature, velocity, and flight trajectory of this UFO closely match the records for Object Number 1. There could be no mistaking what Jarvis meant. Object N1 was the code name for Raditz, the Cyan warrior whose arrival once plunged Earth into chaos. Now, encountering the same distinctive energy readings again spelled trouble of the highest order. Tony drew a steadying breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Whatever was coming, it would test them like never before. The Cyans were incredibly powerful, and they always seemed to know exactly where Earth was hidden. We'd been on constant alert ever since Raditz's first attack. "Again?" Tony muttered under his breath as alarms blared around him. A flash of steel crossed his eyes. "This time, I won't let them get their hands on the planet." Raditz had been captured once, but not before warning that more of his kind would come. From that moment on, Tony's nights had been plagued by nightmares of a Cyan invasion. His anxiety only deepened when Raditz mysteriously vanished from his cell. He'd sent Captain Marvel and Jarvis on a worldwide search, but neither could find so much as a trace of the missing Cyan warrior. Now Tony was convinced that the explosive threat could strike from anywhere, at any time. Determined to prevent another catastrophe, Tony had consolidated power behind the scenes, mirroring the Illuminati's covert rule in the comics. Thanks to Steve Rogers' fierce objections and Captain Marvel's staunch refusal, however, the Illuminati remained nothing more than a hidden council, secret controllers, never public rulers. Jarvis's calm voice crackled through the comms. "Sir," he said, "I'm picking up another energy reading. It's enormous." Tony squared his shoulders. "Put the rest of the world on alert, and Jarvis, find me every scrap of intel on Saiyan arrival signatures. I want to know exactly where and when they'll hit next." "Right away, sir." As Jarvis dove back into the data streams, Tony stared at the holomap of Earth hovering in front of him. The fate of the planet was on the line, and this time he refused to fail. Ethan understood exactly how determined Tony was and how impossible their mission would be. Yet he refused to waver. As Tony's closest aide and Earth's appointed guardian, Ethan would face this challenge at his side. "Sir, I have activated the global defense grid," Jarvis reported smoothly. "Clones 1 through 199 are being deployed and standing by for combat." Tony gave a firm nod. Jarvis had everything under control. "Send notifications to the other Illuminati members," he said. "And on the off chance he can receive it, ping Thor as well. It's our best hope." "Right away, sir." Within moments, Jarvis had fired off the alerts. Tony rose from his workbench and strode to the far side of the laboratory. There, gleaming under the bright overhead lights, stood his newest creation, the anti-imaginary enemy suit. Tony tapped a control panel, and the armor's segmented plates slid seamlessly into place, ready to face whatever threats lay ahead. Chapter 566. The Saiyans are coming. A colossal shock wave rippled outward from the explosion, fanning into a raging storm of energy. Though space itself remained eerily silent, Earth satellites captured every pulse and fluctuation, beaming the raw footage back to Tony Stark's control center. After delivering that decisive blow, the interceptor cannon had clearly emptied its reserves. The brilliant glow at its muzzle dimmed, then winked out entirely. In the lab's command pod, Tony stared at the monitors, eyes darting between streaming images and scrolling readouts. His gut knotted with both dread and anticipation. He knew the planet's safety hinged on the outcome of this strike. "Did it land?" he breathed. His voice shook. With no direct line of sight, he had to trust what the data and visuals were telling him. Victory or catastrophe lay somewhere out there in the void. "Sir," Jarvis's calm, measured tone cut through the tension. "We are detecting a high-energy reaction at the impact site." That single announcement sent Tony's pulse racing once more. He straightened, steeling himself for whatever came next, and praying they weren't too late. "Energy readings are off the charts." Jarvis's calm voice kept reporting the data, but Ethan barely heard him. His gaze was locked on the screen. From the heart of the explosion, a blinding beam of energy shot outward, striking the interceptor satellite cannon with unbelievable speed. In the blink of an eye, the cannon dissolved into nothingness. Ethan's jaw dropped. The interceptor was his crowning achievement, a weapon he'd conceived, designed, and refined to safeguard Earth from any cosmic threat. And now it was gone, erased by some mysterious force. "This can't be real," he muttered, shock and fear warring in his chest. According to his models, the interceptor cannon was powerful enough to obliterate even dinosaur-killer asteroids. Yet here it was, vaporized as if it never existed. Before Ethan could gather his thoughts, Jarvis's voice cut through the silence again. "Sir, another high-energy reaction detected." Ethan straightened in his command chair, steeling himself. Whatever was out there had just begun. "This time it's aimed straight at our ground installations." Ethan snapped out of his concentration, alarm pulsing through him. "Jarvis, what's the energy output of that beam?" Silence stretched for a heartbeat before Jarvis's measured voice responded. "I'm unable to produce an accurate estimate. The beam's intensity exceeds our sensor limits and dwarfs any energy source in our database." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Why can't you measure it?" "The energy signature is off the charts," Jarvis explained, tone tinged with surprise. "Our instruments are overwhelmed. I recommend we activate all emergency defenses immediately while we continue analyzing the beam's origin and composition." "Make it happen," Ethan ordered without hesitation. "Deploy every defense system we have and boost our analytical protocols. I want a full breakdown of that beam now." At his command, the entire defensive network sprang to life. Satellites locked on the incoming threat. Ground-based radars swept the skies. Anti-missile batteries powered up. Every available resource, mechanical, electronic, and human, mobilized to confront the unprecedented assault. Simultaneously, the lab's most advanced diagnostics redoubled their efforts, probing the mysterious energy beam for any clue to its nature. Vegeta and Nappa hadn't expected to be ambushed the moment they drew near Earth. Seasoned Saiyans though they were, even they couldn't survive long in the vacuum of space, so they plunged toward the planet at full throttle. Their vessels spat fire as they tore through the upper atmosphere, flames trailing behind them like a dragon's tail. The frictional heat was enough to melt steel, but to the Saiyan warriors it felt like little more than an irritating sting. Their skin blistered red but remained unbroken, somehow growing tougher under the fiery siege. As they closed in, Earth's gravity gripped them more, fiercely, pulling their bodies downward with an invisible force. Their hearts hammered, their blood raced. Every muscle ached in eager anticipation of the battle to come. At last, after a blazing descent, they burst out of the inferno and touched down on solid ground. Their boots hit the earth with a heavy thud that rolled across the barren landscape, heralding their arrival. The two Saiyans plummeted from the sky with such force that the air itself trembled around them, sending concentric ripples racing across the clouds. In a nearby command center, Tony adjusted his advanced tracking array and instantly pinpointed their impact point. To his surprise, they'd landed on American soil, a choice no one had expected after their last disastrous visit. Nappa flexed his limbs as he felt the planet's light gravity press gently against him. "Vegeta," he called with a grin, "this gravity's a joke, like I'm lifting a toy." Vegeta scoffed and crossed his arms. Naturally, Planet Vegeta's gravity was 10 times Earth's. Of course we'd breeze through this one. What I can't believe is that this planet claimed Kakarot and Raditz, two Saiyan warriors cut down by mere Earthlings. Pathetic. He tapped his scouter, bringing it to life. Soon the little device began to beep in rapid succession. Ding, ding, ding. 6,000, Nappa announced, squinting at the readout. "Do you hear that? Someone on this planet's power is 6,000? Vegeta's eyes narrowed. "Let's see who dares to stand out." Vegeta's voice trembled with a hint of nervousness. Until now, he'd believed himself unbeatable on this world. But that confidence was quickly evaporating. He'd assumed the strongest warrior here, topped out around 1,100 power level, ample strength to take down Raditz, or even a small squad of fighters whose levels clustered in the same range. "I never imagined anyone here could reach 6,000, he growled, scanning his scouter in disbelief. "A 6,000 power level?" Nappa echoed, his bravado draining away as sweat beaded on his brow. How on earth can a backward planet that hasn't even left its own star system produce someone that strong? Vegeta's teeth clenched. The scouter display still read 6,000 beneath a single name, Ethan. This renegade, this so-called Earthling, had shattered every expectation they'd held about this world. And now, against all odds, he was proving more dangerous than either of them had ever feared. Chapter 67. The war is about to break out. Vegeta's lips curled into a derisive sneer as he surveyed the battlefield reports. "Humph. It seems this—" Ethan answered for Kakarot and Raditz himself. A cold spark ignited in his eyes. With a power level of 6,000, it's no surprise Raditz fell so easily. There was a merciless edge to his tone, hardly a hint of sympathy for the fallen brothers. Beside him, Nabal clenched his fists, struggling to swallow his indignation. Raditz and Kakarot had each boasted power levels near 6,000, while Nabal himself peaked at only 4,000. It felt intolerable that such formidable warriors had been cut down so decisively. Still, he forced his breathing to steady. Even so, he told himself, this isn't a disgrace. They met a worthy foe. He raised his chin defiantly. I may only clock in at 4,000, but I'm still one of the Saiyan elite. Vegeta nodded, excitement flickering across his stern face. Indeed, our journey to Earth is proving far more interesting than imagined. To find an opponent with such strength, it's exhilarating. But there were more blips on the power scanners. Nabal's eyes narrowed as he tracked the next reading. A 1,500-level warrior, closing in on our position. He frowned. Reinforcements? A distraction? Either way, the battle lines were being drawn. As Vegeta's lips curved into that familiar, ruthless grin, both Saiyans felt the same hard truth settle over them. A war of unprecedented scale was about to erupt, and they would have to be ready. Ethan stared at the glowing numbers on the scanner, unable to hide his surprise. He hadn't expected that, beyond the Saiyan whose power level reached 6,000, the device would detect so many other fighters of real strength. Beep. 957, 123, 99, 96. 10? The readings streamed in one after another. Nappa and Vegeta exchanged increasingly grave looks. They had assumed this planet was nearly defenseless, yet it was teeming with warriors. Even those with double-digit power levels, weak in isolation, existed in such numbers that they could not be ignored. And the 3- and 4-digit readings only deepened their shock. Elsewhere, Rocky and Ultron were tracking the Saiyan incursion through different channels. After Tony Stark reactivated Jarvis, Ultron wisely avoided direct access to Stark's network. He still remembered how dangerously upgraded Jarvis had become. Instead, Ultron gathered intelligence via Hydra cells, now controlled by Luo Ji. Those agents, embedded in governments around the world, kept a close eye on all superhuman activity. Unaware that his own agent, Raditz, had already been compromised, Rocky leaned forward in anticipation. The Saiyans were on their way, and he could hardly wait to see how the invasion would unfold. High above the city, a young woman clad in purple tights perched on a skyscraper's edge, watching Vegeta and Nappa with bright, curious eyes. She tilted her head, licked her lips, and murmured, "Is that a Saiyan? Delicious." Though her tone was playful, the air around her crackled with an unmistakable power. She was no ordinary schoolgirl playing make-believe. Below, Vegeta and Nappa stood motionless, their scouters scanning the crowd. Vegeta glanced at his readout. "That one with a power level of 6,000, he isn't moving." Nappa's laugh rang out, edged with irritation. "What, you think he's looking down on us?" Vegeta sneered. "Seems those two losers, Kakarot and Raditz, gave everyone the wrong idea about Saiyans." His contempt for the brothers was clear. In their eyes, Kakarot and Raditz were nothing but embarrassments, weaklings dragging the entire cast into disrepute. Nappa's face grew even darker, his eyes flashing with anger at the mere thought. Ethan could not stand such an insult, nor the contempt aimed at all Saiyans. "What an arrogant fool," he snarled, his voice rolling through the cavernous arena like distant thunder. A crackling aura flared around him, distorting the very air with its raw intensity. Beside him, another Saiyan warrior bristled, his own aura roaring to life. Together, their voices reverberated. "He dares to look down on us Saiyans? We'll show him real power." Suddenly, the vast hall fell under the shadow of their combined energies. Objects trembled, and the light dimmed, as if the world itself recoiled. On the far side of the arena, an alliance of heroes steeled themselves against this overwhelming might. Tony Stark, in his gleaming armor, Steve Rogers with shield poised, Captain Marvel's cosmic glow pulsing around her, the Hulk's hulking frame tensed for battle, Jarvis hovering at the ready, and a host of fearless warriors standing shoulder to shoulder. Opposite them loomed the giant Nabal. He stood at least 9 feet tall, every muscle on his body knotted like chiseled stone. His eyes were cold, razor-sharp, eyes that seemed to peel away pretense and see straight to the marrow. Then he unleashed a roar so mighty the air itself seemed to shudder. With the thunderous weight of a charging rhinoceros, he crashed forward. Each step shook the earth, each breath he drew carried the promise of unstoppable force. Ethan tightened his fists, his golden aura flaring brighter. The moment had come. Saiyan pride demanded nothing less than victory, and he would make sure every mortal in that arena witnessed the true meaning of Saiyan's strength. Ethan and his companions stood frozen, hearts pounding, as Nabal's colossal frame loomed before them. They knew that facing such a foe left no room for even the smallest mistake. With a thunderous roar, Nabal slammed his massive palms together, then thrust them apart in one swift motion. A violent shockwave exploded from his core, rushing outward like a rampaging storm. Immediately, the air around them compressed under an invisible weight, as though an army of hammers pounded their bodies. Each breath became a battle against a crushing force. From Nabal radiated an overwhelming warlike aura, stretching in every direction and magnifying his already immense presence. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and tiny stones and dust lifted into the air, caught in the surge of his power. They hovered around him, defying gravity in a strange, swirling halo. Boom! The impact reverberated through the earth, and everyone knew instinctively This was only the beginning of Nable's unleashed fury. Ethan planted his feet firmly, muscles coiling like springs, then launched himself out of the crater with the force of a cannonball. The ground trembled beneath him as he hurtled toward Smurf Steve. Steve felt the quake and his mind raced for a defense, but Ethan was already on him. A massive fist cut through the air, and a blast of wind slapped Steve's cheek so hard it stung. He caught sight of the rippling blue veins and rough skin on Ethan's knuckles, like a living mountain barreling toward him. Without hesitation, Steve let out a roar and transformed into the Blue Hulk. Bang! Their fists collided in a shower of dust and shockwaves. Steve's punch, powerful as it was, bent under the impact and drove him backward, straight into the cracked earth. The ground splintered and buckled around him. Steve's eyes went wide, his pupils shrank. He had never imagined the gap between their strengths could be so vast. Chapter 568. Tony is defeated again. Nabar's massive fist struck Ethan like a meteor, carrying irresistible force. Ethan barely had time to register the incoming blow before he was driven headfirst into the earth. The ground shattered beneath him, gravel spraying in all directions and stirring a choking cloud of dust. Useless, just as I thought. Tony snarled from the sidelines, arms crossed. His vibranium nanosuit gleamed in the sunlight, every panel interlocking perfectly. Yet Tony didn't let his guard down. He knew how dangerous Nabar could be. With a few precise taps on his gauntlet, the armor's smooth surface fractured along hidden seams, revealing rows of gleaming micro-thrusters. In an instant, the thrusters flared to life, hurling Tony forward with blistering speed. He became a living bullet, streaking through the haze toward Nabar. When Tony's fist connected with Nabar's jaw, a thunderous crack echoed across the battlefield. The impact rattled the air like a shockwave, and yet Nabar stood firm, scarcely budged by the blow. Dust swirled around the two combatants as Tony recoiled, knuckles vibrating from the collision. Nabar's cold laughter rang out. "Is that the best you can do, Stark?" Tony's eyes narrowed beneath the helmet's red glow visor. He steadied himself, ready to strike again, determined not to be defeated a second time. Naba didn't even flinch. Tony's strike seemed like nothing more than a tickle to him. "You dare show your face before Uncle Naba?" he taunted, laughter dripping with scorn. With a contemptuous smirk, Naba's massive hand shot out and clamped around Tony's throat as easily as one might catch a chicken. Tony's eyes flew wide in panic as brutal force crushed his windpipe. He could barely draw breath. Frantically, he clawed at Naba's grip, searching for any weakness. But Naba's strength was beyond anything he'd ever imagined. It was as if his head had been caught in an iron vise, utterly immobile. Each square centimeter of Naba's palm pressed down with terrifying tonnage, and he squeezed down harder still, intent on crushing Tony's neck. Tony's face drained of color, veins bulging across his forehead, his expression twisted in excruciating agony. He was seconds from losing consciousness when a ribbon of cold steel light suddenly flashed through the air. "Sir!" Jarvis cried, charging forward. In an instant, his hands transformed into razor-sharp blades that gleamed in the harsh light, ready to cut through anything standing between them. Ethan sprang forward and slashed at Naba without a second thought, driven by the need to protect Tony. Naba barely tilted his head, swerved aside, and offered Ethan a contemptuous grin before delivering a kick that could have toppled a small mountain. Ethan's nanosuit didn't hesitate. In an instant, it ran complex calculations on the force, angle, and timing of the strike, and then reconfigured itself. The armor's impact zone melted and flowed like liquid metal as millions of nanites surged outward and formed a protective pocket. Naba's kick slammed into empty air. Naba recovered instantly, twisting mid-flight to launch another attack. His gaze locked onto Ethan's suit as if he could will it apart with his stare. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan unleashed a wave of nanorobots. They poured from his armor in serpentine coils, wrapping around Naba's leg and constricting it so tightly he couldn't even shift his stance. A hiss of surprise escaped Naba's lips as he thrashed, but the more he struggled, the tighter the nanites bound him. Ethan stood over him, poised for whatever came next. Jarvis swept his twin blades through the air again, the edges slicing into Naba like a razor-sharp gale. His attacks were unnervingly precise, every movement born of lethal expertise. Naba's eyes widened in shock as an invisible force locked around his legs. He strained to pull free, but the nanobots under Jarvis's control were far beyond anything he'd imagined. It felt as though iron chains had clamped around his shins, and the vibranium alloy in the bots sapped every ounce of his strength. He couldn't budge. Before Naba could collect himself, Jarvis unleashed another assault, 2 blades flashing so fast they were little more than streaks of light. Pain exploded across Naba's torso, and a thunderous crack echoed through the chamber. Then, in a desperate counter, Naba seized Tony, Ethan's armored companion, and swung him like a battering ram. The makeshift weapon collided with Jarvis's chest, sending him hurtling in a perfect arc across the room. He smashed into the far wall, debris spraying outwards, and lay still for a heartbeat. But Jarvis refused to stay down. A bright, humming glow erupted from his suit as its nanotech weaved flesh and metal back together. He staggered to his feet, every motion fueled by that relentless, self-repairing armor. Even as he rose, though, tiny strands of nanobots slipped free from his body, weaving themselves around Naba's ankles to reassert their grip. Naba hissed, caught once more in the vice-like hold. Jarvis might have been battered, but the fight was far from over. Napa was just about to unleash a key wave to obliterate that part of his body when Captain Marvel came barreling in. She tapped into her binary form, and in an instant her entire being blazed with radiant light, like a goddess descending from the heavens. She struck Nappa with such force that he stumbled back several paces. As he steadied himself, Nappa scowled in irritation. These Earthlings were proving far tougher than he'd expected, and the thought rankled him. Determined to overwhelm them, he inhaled deeply and let his power surge. His aura swelled, crackling with energy, warping the air around him as though the atmosphere itself couldn't contain his strength. On the sidelines, Vegeta watched in astonishment. Captain Marvel's binary mode transformation had boosted her power level into the 4-digit range, a level he hadn't thought possible for her. Are they hiding their true strength? He wondered out loud. Before anyone could answer, a blur of green hurtled straight toward Vegeta. The figure charging at Vegeta was the Green Hulk, huge, heavily muscled, and radiating a brutal, untamed energy. He had no strategy beyond raw force, no finesse beyond a swinging fist. Like a bolt of emerald lightning, he closed the distance in an instant, knuckles white with effort. His single-minded goal, knock Vegeta flat. But Vegeta merely smiled, the corner of his mouth curling with disdain. Combat power 1 to 3, he murmured, voice low but laced with absolute confidence. Pathetic. As the Hulk's fist rocketed forward, Vegeta didn't dodge. He planted his feet and almost lazily caught the blow with one hand, halting all that green fury as if swatting away an insect. Ethan's eyes flared with emerald light as he clenched his fists and coiled every muscle, ready to channel all his power into a single, devastating strike. He drew a deep breath, surged forward, and swung his fist like a mighty hammer at Vegeta. But the moment Ethan's iron-hard knuckles met Vegeta's unyielding palm, an overwhelming counterforce exploded through him, like a raging torrent smashing into his defenses. Pain shot through his arm, each nerve ending screaming as if pierced by countless steel needles. He staggered backward, every footfall sinking into invisible cotton, his balance gone. Astonished, Ethan lifted his head, green eyes wide with disbelief at the warrior standing before him. Before he could react, Vegeta vanished and reappeared directly in front of him, cold indifference and lethal intent burning in his gaze as if Ethan were nothing more than prey. Then came the blow. Vegeta's fist crashed into Ethan's chest with bone-rattling force, driving the air from his lungs and sending him sprawling. Ethan, his hulking form radiating raw gamma power, felt a colossal impact slam into his chest as though hit by a wrecking hammer. Pain exploded through him, and he rocketed skyward like a cannonball. In mid-flight, the Hulk's mind boiled with rage and disbelief. His green, gamma-charged blood spurted out in arcing streams, like nightmarish blossoms against the blue sky. Vegeta's punch had nearly pierced his ribcage, leaving him gasping for air. He couldn't accept it. He refused to believe a Saiyan had bested him so completely. And yet, the bitter truth was undeniable. The gap in power between him and these two Saiyans, Vegeta and Naba's, was insurmountable. He remembered his battle with Raditz. Though he had lost that fight, he'd at least been able to hold his own. Against Vegeta and Nabas, however, he was a leaf in a hurricane. Fury churned in his chest. Damn, these two are leagues beyond Raditz. Across the battlefield, Tony Stark pushed himself upright. The makeshift shield he'd rigged, its inner lattice a clever mimic of Captain America's original vibranium weave, had taken the brunt of the Saiyan assault. Though Black Caesar had shattered Cap's iconic disc, Tony had painstakingly studied its fractures and the echoes of Raditz's last encounter, scavenging every fragment of data. Now, his jury-rigged barrier still held enough integrity to keep him on his feet. He drew a slow, steady breath. The battle had only just begun. The material in Raditz's battle armor simply doesn't exist on Earth. Tony Stark spent every second he could analyzing its molecular and atomic structure, and found that it was unbelievably tough. That's why we've ended up with this super durable anti-imaginary enemy suit. Thanks to that, Tony walked away unscathed, even after Nappa used him like a hammer to knock Jarvis aside. But Tony, who trusts data above all, couldn't help crunching the numbers from just a few minutes of combat, and what he discovered was jaw-dropping. Both Nappa and Vegeta vastly outclass Raditz in raw power. Raditz's scouter was smashed down to a piece no larger than a grain of sand, so Stark couldn't recover the original readings, but he reconstructed roughly equivalent figures with his own sensors. The results were staggering. Saiyans truly are the galaxy's deadliest warriors. Vegeta murmured as he glanced at his scouter. The green monster he'd just flattened, he'd assumed it was dead, but now its power reading hovered at 300. Vegeta frowned in confusion. What was going on? Ethan realized the fight was far from over. A flicker of surprise crossed Nobble's eyes. He'd assumed Captain Marvel was powerful, but he hadn't expected this. From Ethan's vantage point, Carol's strength kept climbing. Each blow felt freshly charged, as if fueled by an endless supply of energy. In her binary state, her powers had surged even further. Her body seemed to function like a colossal energy conduit, drawing power from the very air around her and converting it into raw force. It wasn't the wildly exaggerated binary power of the comics, but it was more than enough to keep Nabal on the back foot. Nabal's stance grew tighter. He no longer dared leave himself open. Just then, Steve Rogers sprang into action. With the precision born of years of training, he closed the distance and clamped one arm around Nabal's, wrenching him off balance. His movements were clean and decisive, purely functional grappling designed to shut down Nabal's counterattacks. Meanwhile, Captain Marvel hovered a few feet away, photon energy crackling in her palms. Her eyes locked onto Nabal with steely resolve, determined to end the fight here and now. Ethan held his breath, bracing himself for the moment when Carol would unleash the decisive strike. Captain Marvel's final photon blast tore through the air like a living thing, a roaring wave of pure energy hurtling toward Ethan at breakneck speed. The ground trembled under its onslaught as she poured every ounce of her power into that single strike. Summoning every reserve he had, Ethan met her attack head-on, channeling his own energy to blunt the worst of it. Had he wavered, or had Captain Marvel held back even slightly, the blast might have traveled tens of thousands of meters instead of the few it did. When the light died away, Ethan and Steve lay sprawled on the scorched battlefield, their bodies crumpled and marked by fresh cuts and bruises. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ethan forced himself to his feet, every muscle trembling with the effort. Beside him, Steve, once a curious, blue-skinned figure, whispered about as indestructible, shook himself off and cracked a grin. His power level had recently erupted into the 4-digit range, transforming him from an innocuous sideshow into a genuine threat. They exchanged fierce, determined looks across the ruined earth. Captain Marvel hovered overhead, catching her breath, but neither Ethan nor Steve showed the slightest hint of surrender. The battle was far from over. Ethan squared off against his opponent, both fighters boasting power levels well into the 4 digits. From the sidelines, Nappa, his attention split by constant outside interference, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "How is this possible?" he gasped. He'd never seen Earthlings who could raise their combat power on the fly like this. When two warriors are so evenly matched, there's no clear path to victory unless one overwhelms the other by orders of magnitude. Captain Marvel watched with growing frustration. She loathed the Saiyans' uncanny defenses. Her photon blasts were theoretically unstoppable. No known matter or energy could withstand them. Yet the Saiyan in front of her shrugged off her most powerful strikes as if they were mere sparks. True, he bore a wound, but it was superficial at best. Vegeta, observing from a short distance, clenched his fists. He could no longer remain a passive bystander. This planet, these fighters, were proving far stranger and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 570. Anger is Power. Ethan hovered at the edge of the ruined battlefield, watching Vegeta finally decide to enter the fray. In the original timeline, the Saiyan Prince had dismissed these Earth heroes as insignificant. No gamma-fueled wrath like the Hulk, no energy-absorbing feats like Captain Marvel, and none of Steve Rogers' uncanny ability to break every limit with sheer will. Yet Rogers' so-called 50-50 power, pure determination that pushed him beyond any boundary, was proving nearly unstoppable, provided he survived the opening blows. Down below, Steve Rogers and Carol Danvers pressed their advantage against Nappa. Rogers' shield smashed through armor plates even as Danvers unleashed beams of cosmic energy. Stark's latest weapon systems, Jarvis's precise battlefield commands, Venom's brutal strikes, and the tiny swarm of Illuminati drones all pounded Nappa relentlessly. With each second, his armor cracked and his body weakened. Vegeta's scowl deepened as he felt their power swelling. Even his legendary pride couldn't let him stand idle any longer. With a roar, he rocketed forward, intent on stopping Rogers or Danvers before they could put Nappa down for good. The ground shuddered under the impact of his landing. Ethan's lips curled into a knowing smile. He understood better than anyone how anger and unbreakable resolve could transform the improbable into the inevitable. Now, as Vegeta prepared to crush the humans with raw Saiyan force, the true question hung in the charged air. Which would give way first, the prince's crushing arrogance or the hero's unyielding spirit? Nappa was free to handle the other threats, leaving Vegeta alone to deal with the Hulk. But at that moment, the green behemoth charged back in, undeterred. Vegeta's eyes narrowed in surprise. Only moments ago, his punch had nearly ripped the Hulk in two, a strike that would have been fatal to any creature, no matter how strong. Even if the Hulk's power level had jumped to 300, Vegeta was sure such a wound would keep him out of the fight. Yet here he stood, whole and seemingly even more formidable than before. Could he regenerate like the Namekians? Vegeta wondered. Namekians are famous for their rapid healing. As long as part of their body remains intact, they can recover from nearly any injury. The Hulk's ability to shrug off a devastating blow suggested a similar gift. Vegeta allowed himself a small, knowing nod. In all his battles across the universe, he'd seen countless strange powers, and regeneration was not unprecedented. Settling back into his fighting stance, he braced himself for the next clash. Ethan's one advantage was his regenerative power, but even that had its limit. If an opponent could obliterate every fragment of his body, he couldn't come back. With that fact in mind, Vegeta's eyes grew cold and hard. He wasn't about to give Ethan another opening. This time, he would rely on nothing but his own strength to end the fight for good. The moment Vegeta moved in, the tension across the battlefield spiked. Steve Rogers, Captain Marvel, and the others all felt it, a pressure unlike anything they'd ever faced. They recognized how dangerous Ethan could be, but none of them considered retreat. Instead, that same pressure stoked their fighting spirits even higher. Ethan himself had known setback and defeat more times than he cared to count. Each failure, from his clashes with the Martian Empire's Royal Guard to his brutal contest with Black Caesar to that fateful duel with Raditz, had taught him that his power did not make him invincible. Every battle had exacted a heavy toll. Through those trials, he'd learned both how low you can fall and how high you can rise when you refuse to give up. Yet Ethan also knew his greatest strengths: an unbreakable will, lightning-fast reflexes honed in endless fights, and that singular gift of regeneration. Now, as Vegeta rushed toward him with lethal intent, Ethan readied himself. He would prove that even total destruction wasn't enough to keep him down. Ethan paused for a heartbeat, drawing on a lesson he'd learned since his youth. His father, Emperor Luther, had warned him before this journey that the true source of his strength lay in his anger. When you face an enemy, you cannot overpower, the Emperor had said. Let your fury take control. Throw each punch with your whole heart, and everything will follow. Now, with a roar that split the air, Ethan unleashed his pent-up rage in a single devastating blow aimed squarely at Vegeta. His fist crackled like a thunderbolt as it hurtled toward its mark. Vegeta's cold gaze never wavered. He made no move to dodge. Instead, he squared his shoulders, met Ethan's strike head-on, and slammed his own fist into Ethan's. At the instant of contact, the two forces collided with cataclysmic energy. The ground beneath them trembled. Dust and rubble spiraled into the sky. A shockwave tore through the battlefield, distorting the air in shimmering waves. Boom! The explosion of power was thunderous. Vegeta's punch tore through Ethan's forearm and fist with brutal precision. Bone splintered, blood spattered, and flesh was sent flying. The sheer ferocity of the impact would have staggered any warrior. Ethan cried out in agony, staggering backward 3 paces. His vision blurred, pain shot up his arm, and yet rage burned brighter in his eyes than ever. He recognized now just how strong his adversary was, but backing down was not an option. Clenching his teeth, he squared his stance once more. His anger, his power, waited to be unleashed again. Ethan glared at Vegeta, an unyielding fire burning in his eyes. He refused to fall. With his only good hand, he propped himself up on the cracked earth, each ragged breath echoing his fierce determination. His chest heaved as if hell itself raged inside him. Before Ethan could recover, Vegeta struck again. In a blur of motion, he reappeared beside Ethan and drove a devastating punch into his side. Ethan roared, pushing back as hard as he could, but against Vegeta's overwhelming strength, his resistance was in vain. With a resounding crash, Ethan's massive form was sent sprawling across the battlefield. His ribs crumpled, blood spurted from his mouth, and darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. Vegeta didn't hesitate. He closed the distance in an instant and delivered a brutal kick to Ethan's skull. Agony exploded through Ethan's mind, and he unleashed one last defiant roar. Then his body went still. His spirit, though unbroken, had no strength left to rise. With a thunderous crack, Vegeta's boot connected with the Hulk's skull, sending it flying in a wide arc through the sky. The severed head landed with a heavy thud, dust and debris erupting around it. The Hulk's massive, headless body wavered for an instant before collapsing in a ground-shaking crash. "Hulk!" Steve Rogers cried out, voice choked with disbelief. None of them could believe their eyes. The Hulk had stood firm against terrifying adversaries like Black Caesar, yet here he was, literally torn apart by Vegeta's assault. But Vegeta wasn't finished. He raised his hand and unleashed a crackling ki blast into the fallen torso. Tony Stark's nanotech suit flared alarms as Jarvis's voice rang out. "Warning, extreme energy buildup detected. Immediate evacuation advised." "Get back!" Tony shouted, shoving Steve and the others to cover as the battlefield trembled with the surge of power. Chapter 571, Destruction of Heaven and Earth. Ethan, Steve, Tony, and the others had learned a great deal about Saiyan energy attacks during their battle with Raditz. So when Vegeta began charging his ki wave, they sensed the danger before Tony could even shout a warning. Instinctively, they dived and rolled to put distance between themselves and the assault, but Vegeta's power was far beyond anything they'd faced before. With a thunderous crack, a massive sphere of energy erupted from Vegeta, growing almost instantaneously. At first it shone a pale, icy blue, then it deepened into a sinister violet that seemed to swallow every scrap of light in the sky. The ground trembled as ripples of raw power radiated outward, bending the very air around them. From a physics standpoint, a ki wave converts the Saiyan's internal high-density bioenergy into an explosive external pulse. As that pulse expands, it slams into air molecules and superheats them on contact. The rapid heating forces the air to expand violently, carving out an immense vacuum in the wake of the blast. A moment later, a titanic shockwave erupted from the core of the Qigong pulse and roared outward in all directions. Its power was enough to obliterate any barrier in its path. As the wave raced along, it compressed the air before it into a high-pressure front. That high-pressure region then explosively expanded into the surrounding atmosphere, creating a rapidly shifting pattern of alternating high and low pressures. These dynamic pressure differentials drove the shock front forward at breakneck speed. Under the onslaught of this shock wave, soil, rocks, and even trees instantly vaporized. The energy packed into the wave was so intense that it disrupted the molecular bonds of every substance it touched, turning solid matter into gas in a fraction of a second. In physics, this instantaneous gasification under extreme heat and pressure is known as pyrolysis, and it was happening everywhere the shock passed. But the devastation didn't end with vaporized terrain. The sheer force of the Qigong wave also sent powerful tremors rippling through the earth itself. The ground shook violently, fissuring under the strain, as the unleashed energy reshaped the landscape in an instant. The Qigong waves didn't just roll across the surface, they drove straight into the bedrock below. As the energy surged through the underground strata, immense pressure warped the rocks and set off a vicious earthquake. The ground trembled as if an invisible giant hand were tearing it apart, and at once deep fissures split the earth. Those cracks snaked outward, widening with terrifying speed until they merged into one colossal rift valley. This chasm was born of fractured crustal plates. The planet's outer shell rests in segments, and when a force like Qigong energy strikes them, they can shift, rupture, and reshape the landscape, forming rifts, mountains, or valleys. Jagged edges framed the new valley, as though a titanic axe had cleaved the earth. Entire slabs of crust had been ripped and displaced, leaving raw, sheer walls. All at once, the battlefield was transformed into a hellish wasteland, a purgatory carved from living rock. Flames shot into the sky, smoke and dust billowed outward, and shockwaves rippled through the air. The violent clash of scalding Qigong energy against the atmosphere ignited fierce blazes. Vaporized debris churned into thick clouds of smoke, and each blast sent thunderous pulses rolling across the battlefield. From the depths of the newly formed chasm came a guttural roar, as though the earth itself were tearing apart. Far below, unseen fractures groaned and ground against one another, their subterranean rumbling surfacing in a deafening crescendo. At the rim of the rift stood Vegeta, his eyes colder than winter ice. He gazed down at the ruined heart of America, treating the once vast land as if it were no more than a shattered plaything. His Qigong wave had carved this gash, a terrible wound, in the earth. The edges of the fissure were scorched black, and its 9 depths vanished into unbroken darkness, as though opening a gateway to another world. The cavernous split in the earth gaped like a fresh wound, a grim testament to Vegeta's overwhelming might and the indelible mark he'd left on the battlefield. Steve stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock and simmering anger. Around him, his comrades fared no better. Every face was etched with fear and despair. They all knew that anyone still trapped in the city when that blow landed would have been wiped out instantly. No one could have guessed Saiyan power was so utterly devastating, or that there was any way to withstand it. Vegeta didn't bother to hide his contempt. He surveyed the devastation with an almost casual air, as if admiring a masterpiece. "I apologize," he drawled, every syllable dripping with mockery. "Your planet is far too fragile. You simply can't contain true power." At his side, Nabal erupted in raucous cheers. "That's it, Vegeta. Leave nothing standing." He thrust his fists into the air, intoxicated by the display of force. Observing the enemy's flailing impotence, no ki control, no defensive Qigong waves, had emboldened him. Now he hungered to unleash his own energy and finish the job. Steve swallowed hard. The weight of their hopelessness pressed down on him, but beneath it burned a furious resolve. He clenched his teeth, inhaled sharply, and then launched himself at Nabal. Every ounce of his desperation channeled into that single, defiant charge. Ethan moved so swiftly, he was almost nothing but an afterimage. His eyes burned with resolve, and his heart brimmed with determination. Bang! Steve's fist collided with Naba's face in a brutal blow, twisting his features out of shape. Naba screamed in agony as he was hurled through the air and crashed to the ground. In that instant, Steve's strength finally overpowered Naba's. No longer forced into a purely defensive posture, he surged forward and launched a counterattack against the Saiyans. Rage and hatred for their devastation fueled him. He could no longer stand by while they destroyed his planet. He would protect this world, his home, at any cost. Damn it! Fuck! Venom, Eddie, and the others stared in horror. As new arrivals to the Illuminati, they had never witnessed such raw destruction. The Saiyans' unleashed power filled them with dread. They knew that if these extraterrestrials weren't stopped, all of North America, and perhaps the entire Earth would be torn apart. Despite their own relative inexperience and lesser power, they steeled themselves and leapt into the fight. Though outmatched, they refused to back down, determined to defend the planet they called home. Ethan and his allies understood that if even they surrendered, the planet would be truly lost. Chapter 5572, Total Annihilation. The Illuminati had mustered nearly every hero and even every supervillain who could fight, forging an uneasy alliance to stand against the Saiyan invasion. Yet the Saiyan's power was almost limitless, and resistance was proving desperately difficult. In a single, merciless strike, Vegeta had vaporized dozens of combatants, heroes and villains alike, leaving nothing behind but ash. Still, even faced with such overwhelming force, the defenders refused to falter. They knew that once hope was lost, Earth would follow. Ethan watched his fellow warriors with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Each of them was sacrificing everything to protect the planet. They weren't fighting alone. They were bound together by a single unbreakable purpose. He drew in a steadying breath, feeling raw energy ignite within him. This was a battle of life and death. He had to give it his all. Clenching his fists, Ethan surged forward toward Vegeta. Every footstep felt like it was anchored to bedrock, driven by unshakable determination and faith. From the corner of his eye, he caught Vegeta's reaction. The Saiyan Prince turned his gaze toward him, a cold sneer curling at the edge of his lips. Ethan could almost feel the disdain radiating off Vegeta, but he refused to back down. This was their last stand, and he would fight to the very end. Ethan sized up the towering blue warrior before him. To his eyes, this behemoth was no more impressive than the green giant he had just crushed, and like that first foe, posed no real threat. From the shape of his ears and the ridges along his jaw, Ethan recognized him as the same species as the green giant he'd slain. Surely this newcomer's rage sprang from loyalty to his fallen comrade. He let out a low growl and flexed his arms, veins snaking beneath his skin. His biceps swelled as if inflated by wind, every fiber brimming with barely contained power. With a roar, he surged forward, aiming to shatter Vegeta's seemingly impenetrable defense in a single blow. No sooner had Ethan closed the distance than a tempest of energy erupted around Vegeta, an invisible storm that bore down on Ethan's chest like a mountain, crushing his lungs and stealing his breath. In that moment, he felt as insignificant as an ant trying to fell an oak. Still, he unleashed everything he had. Boom! His fist met Vegeta's open palm in a thunderous collision that threatened to rip the air apart. The shockwave rolled back in a deafening crack. Yet to Vegeta, it was nothing more than a casual flick of strength. As the dust settled, Ethan realized he was up against far more than he'd bargained for. The impact of their clash ripped the earth open. Buildings around them groaned and cracked, ready to collapse at any moment. In seconds, fissures radiated from the epicenter like spiderwebs, belching thick smoke that hinted at molten rock churning just below the surface. A thunderous shockwave gouged a trench through the street and hurled debris hundreds of meters away, finally coming to rest only after leveling a nearby skyscraper. A choking cloud of dust and rubble hung in the air, obscuring everything in a murky haze. Yet Vegeta stood unmoved, a living mountain amid the chaos. His dark hair whipped wildly in the turbulent air, but his posture never faltered. He fixed Steve with a cold, disdainful stare, as if the challenger were no more than a bothersome insect. Then, with a single effortless motion of his arm, he brushed Steve aside as though flicking away a pesky fly, his contempt unmistakable. The sheer force of Vegeta's light wave struck Ethan like a raging tornado, sending him sprawling. His body arced through the air before slamming onto the arena floor. A searing pain shot through him, every nerve in his body ablaze, and a crushing blow to his chest stole his breath. Still, Ethan refused to yield. Gritting his teeth, he hauled himself up and lunged at Vegeta again, defiance burning brightly in his eyes. Vegeta offered no mercy. With a single, effortless motion of his hand, he unleashed a blinding beam of Ine, RGY, that seemed to rip the very air apart. The destructive blast hurtled straight for Ethan. He barely registered the threat before the beam tore through him, obliterating his body in an instant. Ethan vanished into the light as if he'd never existed. Around the arena, fighters and spectators alike stood frozen, as though struck by an invisible hammer, stunned into silence by the overwhelming display of power. Time seemed to stop. A hush of disbelief and horror settled over the battlefield. Ethan, the heroic leader who had guided them through countless battles and saved the world time and again, was dead. Under Vegeta's devastating strike, his body lay in pieces, scattered across the ground like shattered pottery. The muscles that once rippled with strength lay pale and lifeless. The eyes that had burned with unbreakable resolve were now empty and unfocused. No one dared believe it. The indomitable warrior they'd always counted on had fallen. Captain Marvel stood frozen, staring at the ruin of his form. Shock left her speechless. "What are you looking at, woman?" The cold voice cut through her daze. Captain Marvel whipped her head around and saw Naba looming over her, contempt and cruelty etched into every line of his face. Before she could brace herself, a brutal strike crashed into her cheek. It felt like a sledgehammer. She was thrown backward, slamming into a distant wall with bone-jarring force. Ethan tasted blood as a searing pain bloomed across his cheek. His vision darkened at the edges, and for a moment he thought he might black out. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to look up, and saw Naba striding toward him, each step striking like a hammer blow to his battered heart. "Your ally has fallen," Naba said, his voice as cold as steel. "Now it's your turn." He raised a hand, and swirling chi coalesced into a crackling orb of power in his palm. Ethan shook his head, forcing himself to his feet. Steve had given everything. He wouldn't let that sacrifice be for nothing. He plunged his energy outward in a brilliant burst of photon light, hoping to break through Naba's aura. But Naba's presence was overwhelming. The chi waves condensed faster and stronger than Ethan could counter. His photon blast fizzled out long before reaching its mark, flickering into nothingness against the villain's impenetrable force. Ethan staggered, chest heaving. He knew he had to keep fighting, no matter the odds. Chapter 573, Wandering Earth? A surge of chi coalesced in Naba's palm, forming a blazing orb on the brink of detonation. Its radiance was so fierce it banished the shadows, flooding the battlefield with daylight-bright light. This single sphere brimmed with destructive force, and no one dared meet its glare head-on. Naba's eyes were ice-cold, fixed like a predator on its prey, as he awaited the perfect moment to strike. He stood immovable, feet sinking into the ground, as if merging with the earth itself. Opposite him, Captain Marvel felt the orb's oppressive power wrench at her chest, as though an invisible gauntlet squeezed her heart. She knew this was no ordinary attack. One slip, and she could be gravely wounded. Clenching her teeth, she unleashed the photon energy coursing through her veins. It boiled within, and a translucent barrier began to take shape between her outstretched palms. The shield shimmered like tempered glass, defying the brewing storm. Yet Naba's chi orb was beyond anything she had faced. With a piercing whistle, the sphere rocketed forward. When it struck her barrier, the impact reverberated through the air, making the very ground tremble. The sphere of light flared brilliantly, as if it could incinerate everything in its path. Under the onslaught of the Qigong wave, the barrier shattered with a deafening crack that pierced Captain Marvel's ears and sent her heart pounding. She only managed a terrified scream before the energy slammed into her chest, rending her with brutal force. Launched like a cannonball, she arced through the air and crashed onto the ground with earth-shaking impact. Pain overwhelmed her. Her vision swam as consciousness slipped away. She fought to rise, but her limbs refused to obey. Naba stood over her, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He had tasted victory and harbored no more fear of the fallen hero. Across the battlefield, Tony's eyes widened in equal parts fury and dread. Rallying his Jarvis clone army, he barked orders, desperate to stem the Saiyan onslaught. Ethan watched in dismay as Naba's powerful Qigong wave tore through his Jarvis clones like paper in a storm. One after another, the replicas collapsed into glowing strands of data before dissolving into thin air. On his display, the counter ticked downward, and with every loss, Ethan's fear grew. He'd based his entire defense strategy on simulations of Raditz, running endless data models to predict Saiyan combat techniques and power levels. In theory, it should have given him the edge. In reality, Naba and Vegeta were far beyond anything he'd calculated. Even without unleashing their great ape forms, their raw strength was astonishing. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan forced himself to think clearly. Panic would only cost him more of his defenses. With a few rapid commands, he dispersed the remaining Jarvis clones across several attack vectors. If he could pull the Saiyans in different directions, maybe, just maybe, he could spot an opening. As the clones fanned out, Ethan monitored Nappa and Vegeta's reactions, searching desperately for a flaw he could exploit. The battle was far from over. If he stayed calm and clever, he still had a chance. However, the Saiyans proved overwhelmingly powerful, their tactics bewildering. One by one, the scattered Jarvis clones fell under their onslaught, each strike slicing through defenses as if they were paper. Even Tony's rapid tactical adjustments barely registered. "Damn it," Tony Stark growled, eyes blazing with equal parts fury and despair. This fight had spiraled far beyond anything he'd anticipated. He'd counted on the combined might of the Illuminati and his own cutting-edge weapons to hold these cosmic invaders at bay. Instead, the gap between them and the Saiyans was as vast as that between an ant and an elephant. No member of the Illuminati could mount a meaningful counterattack. Their assaults, once formidable, seemed child's play in the face of the Saiyans' overwhelming power. Every coordinated strike was obliterated in an instant by devastating energy waves. The Saiyans shrugged off their best efforts, revealing only a fraction of their true strength. Helplessness settled into Tony's chest like a lead weight. He watched the battlefield with cold clarity. They were outmatched, and the tide of this battle was slipping irrevocably from their grasp. Ethan had once prided himself on being a genius inventor capable of creating all manner of advanced weaponry, but now, confronted by a power that clearly lay beyond human limits, his brilliance and technology felt embarrassingly inadequate. Loki and Ultron, the two opportunists who had been waiting in the wings to profit from whatever chaos ensued, were so frightened they dared not show their faces. They had expected to seize spoils in the confusion, or perhaps even join forces with the Illuminati against the Saiyans, but they never imagined the fight would be decided so swiftly. Crouched in darkness, Loki's expression was one of pure horror. Once a ruler among gods, she now felt like an ant beneath the Saiyans' overwhelming might. Even with Raditz standing at her side, she doubted his previously displayed strength could hold its own against Vegeta and Nappa. Hidden inside a borrowed Saiyan body, Ultron methodically scanned the battlefield, searching for any exploitable weakness in their foes. He ran every simulation he could think of, but no matter how thoroughly he analyzed them, he came up empty. There simply were no flaws to exploit. The entire battlefield felt as though it were drowning in the Saiyans' overwhelming power. A suffocating, terrifying aura hovered in the air, and even Tony Stark, standing defiantly in his nanosuit, could feel despair creeping into his heart. There was no doubt in his mind now. They were going to lose this fight. "Aren't you going to come out?" Vegeta asked with barely disguised boredom. He watched the horizon, waiting. Behind him, Nappa's massive frame was equally unhurried. To them, a fighter whose power level was only 6,000 was hardly worth immediate attention. Tony grimaced. If it hadn't been for Rubatsuit alloy, the vibranium weave in Captain America's shield, and the advanced nanotech woven into his own armor, his forces would have collapsed long ago. Even these powerful clones of his, Tony's nanosuit core, had used up every last reserve of energy holding off the Saiyans. Destroying them had cost Nappa and Vegeta more effort than they'd like to admit. In their eyes, the clones were nothing more than pesky flies. Still, Tony held his ground. He knew exactly what he was waiting for. Black Caesar. There was no way this enigmatic ally would just stand idly by. With the Saiyans so close to breaking through, would he not finally step in and tip the balance? And if he didn't, well, Tony was prepared to face both Vegeta and Nappa himself. Across the continent, America's wealthiest citizens were already planning their escape. As soon as the Saiyan invasion had begun, private jets and armored cars had been commissioned in secret. Tony knew of their plans, and for once, he didn't blame them. Retreat might be the only option left. But as long as he still had his suit, his wits, and the faintest hope of reinforcements, the battle was far from over. Chapter 574. Escape from Earth. Ethan stood on the edge of the platform, staring into a sky churning with storm clouds. The air felt electric, an omen of catastrophic forces gathering above. Rumors had spread that whatever was coming possessed enough power to ravage the entire planet. Beneath that brewing fury, the world's elite quietly enacted their backup plan, the Ark Initiative. For years, the wealthiest families had invested fortunes in massive starships, steel leviathans tested in secret orbital trials. Now, with a single command, they readied these floating citadels for launch. Every corridor was stocked with months' worth of food, medical supplies, and every comfort money could buy, all cataloged and sealed away for their passengers. In their minds, this was the ultimate insurance policy, a way to preserve their bloodlines and privileges in a new world beyond Earth's destruction. But none of this salvation was meant for the common people. Far below the docking bays, where crowds gathered in ragged lines, authorities turned them back with curt apologies and cold shoulders. "Sorry, sir, no openings for the less fortunate," they said, as corporate guards walled off the gantries. Those without wealth, influence, or a coveted ticket were left behind to face whatever apocalypse might strike. Ethan clenched his fists as he watched the last transport shudder to life, its engines igniting in a brilliant flare against the gathering gloom. He knew the future would belong to those who could afford to buy their own safety, and that everyone else, everyone like him, would be forced to run or hide once the storm broke. The Ark had become a symbol not of hope for humanity, but of its greatest divide. And now, with the countdown underway, Earth itself was the battlefield and refuge for those left to fight. They only care about protecting themselves and their families, turning a blind eye to everyone else who shares this world. They worry that if they bring the less fortunate along, the mud legs, as they call them, trouble will follow. But that fear isn't about real danger. It's rooted in distrust and disdain for the poor. They dread that a sudden change in living conditions might set desperate people off, upending carefully laid plans. So they cling to an illusion of stability, using it to shield their power and privilege. Confronting social unrest would risk their status and wealth, so they choose the safe escape hatch rather than face the root causes of inequality. Their chosen destination? Mars, long rumored to be Earth's sister world, with a climate and terrain fit for human life. What these elites don't realize is that the Martian Empire itself has already relocated. All they know is that Ethan ventured there. Beyond that, they remain in the dark about Mars's true state. Only the clandestine Illuminati have set foot on the Red Planet, and even they have returned with nothing more than a handful of cryptic videos. The rest of the story, what lies ahead for Ethan and for anyone bold enough to follow, remains unwritten. These propaganda films had done their job perfectly. They rallied humanity against the Saiyan onslaught by holding up the Mars Empire as Earth's steadfast ally. In reality, however, the situation was far more tangled than anyone suspected. Ethan had once solemnly promised to open formal diplomatic ties with Earth, trade agreements, civilian travel, even cultural exchanges. But barely a month after signing the accords, he abruptly lost interest. Without a word to his human counterparts, he quietly withdrew Mars's envoy corps and shifted the entire Martian seat of power elsewhere. It wasn't long before Tony Stark uncovered the truth. He understood all too well what would happen if the public learned their supposed ally had vanished. Social order would crumble, crime and unrest would spike, and panic would sweep the globe faster than any Saiyan attack. Determined to avert disaster, Tony set about preserving the illusion. He leveraged Stark Industries' media channels to bury any hint of Mars's departure, and the steady stream of optimistic footage, lush Martian colonies thriving, citizens pursuing bold new frontiers, flowing into every home on Earth. At the same time, he tightened oversight of the so-called Ark Plan, the wealthy elite's secretive evacuation project, ensuring it couldn't be twisted into a vehicle for mass hysteria or profiteering from that panic. Thanks to Stark's careful orchestration, the truth about Mars remained hidden in plain sight, and humanity, believing its interplanetary ally still stood by its side, steadied itself for the battles ahead. Despite Tony's stringent regulations, the world's wealthiest elites still maneuvered to secure their own interests. All the while, Tony himself had quietly set in motion what he called the Ark Plan, an insurance policy for humanity against an uncertain and increasingly dangerous future. His goal was simple, yet ambitious: evacuate as many civilians and key experts as possible, then venture beyond the solar system to find a new home. Unusually, Tony made no effort to conceal the ARC plan from his fellow Illuminati members. In fact, they were kept fully informed, which only sharpened their collective resolve. With the breakthrough new element reactor powering the spacecraft, the only remaining challenge was loading each vessel with enough provisions and a self-sustaining ecosystem to keep its passengers alive in the void of space. Jarvis had already begun overseeing the final preparations for the ARC's launch. Tony envisioned a fleet of identical interstellar ARCs, each one engineered to support 1 million people. That figure wasn't arbitrary. It represented the maximum population each ship's life support systems and closed ecological cycles could reliably sustain. While Tony's engineers could have designed even larger vessels, they agreed this was the optimal size for safety, redundancy, and long-term viability. As the countdown to departure loomed, Tony Stark found himself torn between his duty to safeguard humanity's future and the stark reality that he might never see Earth again. Yet he pressed on, determined to give civilization every chance of survival, no matter how far that journey might take them. They could not sacrifice the ship's stability and safety just to squeeze in more passengers. With Captain Marvel at their side, they could push beyond the solar system. Tony Stark reached that conclusion only after painstaking analysis. Earth was no longer safe, and Scion warbands threatened every corner of the globe. They needed a new home. Mars, once colonized by Ethan's Martian empire, lay within reach, the nearest world that might still harbor life. Rumors of comfortable settlements beneath its rust-red surface circulated among the exiles, but those legends were fading memories. This was no heroic quest for discovery. It was a desperate flight from the terror and despair the Scions had unleashed. At Tony's command, the ARC's launch sequence roared to life. The colossal vessel trembled as its engines powered up, as though flexing under the weight of hope and responsibility it carried. In the dying glow of the sunset, its steel hull gleamed with a pale, otherworldly sheen, like a cosmic galleon poised to break free of Earth's grasp. Inside the vast hold, emotions ran the gamut. Some passengers pressed their faces to viewports, eyes alight with longing for a fresh start among the stars. Others clung to loved ones, tears glinting in the fading light, unwilling to let go of home. Ethan stood near the observation deck, gloved hand pressed against cool glass. He was young, but resolute, the officer chosen to lead humanity's exodus into the unknown. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady when he spoke to Tony. "We're ready," he said. Tony nodded. A final chime echoed through the ship's corridors. The ARC shuddered once more, then lifted slowly from its launch cradle. As the engines roared to full thrust, Earth fell away beneath them, and the stars beckoned. It was the end of one world and the very first breath of another. Ethan stood among the crew, each person wrapped in a solemn hush, their hearts heavy with dread over the unknown journey ahead. Still, for all the doubts swirling in their minds, every gaze was fixed on the vast viewport before them. There lay Earth, once their cradle and the home of their fondest memories, now shrunken to a fragile blue marble drifting in the void. They were not merely leaving a planet. They were fleeing an era, the dying embers of a civilization. Despite the danger and uncertainty that awaited them, they carried with them a fragile spark of hope and the promise of a new beginning. "Jarvis, initiate engine start. Full speed ahead," Tony ordered, his voice carrying firm authority that seemed to banish any lingering fear. "Yes, sir. Engines are online and accelerating," came the calm, measured response from Jarvis's console. The hum of power swelled into a thunderous roar. The starship shuddered, then rose steadily from its moorings, clawing its way through thick atmosphere. With each passing second, Earth's pull loosened its grip, and the vessel climbed higher, carrying Ethan and his fellow pioneers ever farther from the world they once knew, bound for the stars and a destiny yet unwritten. Chapter 575, ARC Interception Battle. Just as the ARC spacecraft shuddered free of Earth's gravity and began its ascent into the void, a sudden surge of raw energy erupted from the surface below. The shockwave slammed into the hull like a tempest, threatening to rip the ship apart. Inside, crew members froze in terror as warning lights flashed and alarms screamed. The crisis was immediate and absolute. "It seems someone doesn't want us getting away," Tony Stark murmured, his voice calm despite the chaos. High above the launch pad, Vegeta, Prince of the Saiyans, hovered on a cushion of ki. A cruel smirk played at his lips as he surveyed the struggling Ark vessel. At his side stood Nabel, eyes alight with savage anticipation. Together, they drew upon their key reserves, preparing to unleash devastating blasts that would send any escaping ships plummeting back to Earth. But Stark had anticipated this. He'd refused to board the Ark with the rest of the refugees, opting instead to stay behind in the upper atmosphere. Now, encased in his latest suit of powered armor, he calibrated his thrusters and energy sensors. Below him, Vegeta and Nabel readied their attack. Above him, the Ark teetered on the brink of survival. This would be a life-or-death showdown, one that would determine whether humanity's last hope could break free of a world under siege. Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, just rousing from a serious injury, sprang immediately to Tony's side. Without a moment's hesitation, she braced herself in front of him, ready to stop any assault. Carol knew full well how formidable the Saiyans were, but she believed that together they could endure the onslaught. "Jarvis," Tony ordered, his voice taut, "activate the ship's defense matrix." "I'm on it, sir," the AI responded. Instantly, a complex energy field flickered into life around the hull, its layered barriers designed to absorb and deflect attacks. Whether they could withstand the raw power of the Saiyans' ki blasts, however, remained an open question. Below them, Vegeta and Nappa stood motionless on the tarmac, their cold gazes razor-sharp with resolve and murderous intent. Clad in their dark battle armor, every sinew defined beneath the scuffed plating, they looked like living sculptures of war. Silently, the two Saiyans brought their palms together and began drawing energy inward. A soft, electric blue glow pulsed around their bodies, growing brighter by the second until the very air seemed to crackle with power. In each of their hands, a massive sphere of coherent light took shape, an ominous promise of the devastating blast that would soon follow. Terrifying energy crackled within the glowing spheres, ready to detonate at any moment. "Go to hell!" Nabel bellowed, his voice rolling like thunder. He thrust his hands forward, hurling two massive orbs of light into the sky. They blazed toward the Ark spaceship like celestial meteors, tearing through the atmosphere with a shrill, whistling roar. Perched atop the Ark's hull, Tony Stark and Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, stood unwavering. They both understood that the fate of countless lives hung in the balance. Carol drew a steadying breath as her body ignited in a brilliant radiance. Her eyes gleamed with focused intensity, and she began to channel raw photon energy. Streams of light spiraled around her, weaving together into a vast, shimmering web suspended in the sky, an impenetrable lattice of brilliance. At the same moment, Tony's fingers flew over the Ark's control panel, activating the ship's advanced weapon systems. Automated turrets swiveled into position along every edge, unleashing continuous beams of concentrated laser fire. The high-energy streams converged on the incoming Qigong waves, colliding in a titanic explosion of light and force. Dust and debris rattled across the ship's surface as the two powers battled midair, each determined not to yield. Ethan steadied himself at the Ark's command console, watching as his laser beams met the Saiyan's Qigong wave midair in a deafening collision. The Saiyan's Qi surged Lel, like a writhing dragon, huge, violent, and utterly relentless, its raw power threatening to tear the ship apart. Against that, the Ark's lasers flickered and sputtered, like candles in a hurricane, quickly swallowed and shattered into drifting pinpricks of light. Each impact rattled the vessel so fiercely that alarms shrieked through the corridors. The hull groaned under the onslaught, and Ethan felt his pulse hammer in his ears. Any second now, he feared, the ship might disintegrate. Behind him, Carol finished her last calibration and closed her eyes. She drew in a deep breath, channeled every scrap of photon energy into her palms, then threw her arms forward with a battle cry. A blinding beam of searing light lanced out, colliding with the next Qigong wave in a spectacular burst that lit the void like colliding stars. Ethan exhaled and braced for the next strike, determined to hold the Ark together and protect his crew, no matter what. Ethan pressed himself against the rail of the Ark's observation deck, eyes stinging from the intense glare overhead. The entire sky seemed alight with raw power, so bright it hurt to look directly. Then came a deafening boom, as if the universe itself were ripping apart. Where the Science Qigong waves slammed into Tony Stark's laser fire and Captain Marvel's photon bursts, a colossal vortex of energy spiraled into being, sucking in anything nearby and carving a yawning vacuum in the void. Still, the Saiyan assault showed no sign of stopping. They hurled wave after wave of Qigong at the Ark, each strike like an unrelenting downpour. Below him, Tony and Carol Danvers fought furiously to shield the ship. Repulsor beams, photon blasts, and Qigong collided mid-space in blinding flashes, each detonation unleashing shockwaves that rattled the Ark's hull. The ship shuddered violently, its flight path teetering on the edge of collapse. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched Stark's HUD flicker and Danvers reroute power through strained conduits. Another blast rocked the deck, sending loose panels clattering. But Ethan refused to flinch. Gripping the rail with white-knuckled determination, he steadied himself against the tempest of energy, ready to do whatever it took to help hold the Ark together. Their faces were etched with solemnity and tension. They all sensed this battle would be far more grueling than they'd ever imagined. But Tony's Ark ship was hopelessly outmatched. After all, they had shunned cooperation, refused to aid others, and focused only on their own survival. Now, stripped of the Illuminati's energy shield and without the protection of a vibranium shell, they watched helplessly as a Saiyan Ki wave hurtled toward them. Dread gripped their hearts. When the Ki wave struck, it landed with the force of a colossal meteor, unleashing an incomprehensible flash of light. In an instant, the Ark ship disintegrated, fracturing into countless scintillating fragments that vanished against the backdrop of the sky. The explosion's shockwave rippled outward, as if trying to engulf the entire world. Air itself seemed to be dragged away, leaving behind an eerie, yawning vacuum. The wealthy passengers who'd once crowded the ship had vanished without a trace, leaving only terrified screams echoing through the corridors. The Saiyans didn't pause after obliterating the vessel. As if driven by some unseen force, they unleashed wave after wave of Ki energy in a frenzied barrage. Chapter 576. Pursuit. Silver arcs of Chi energy twisted through space like a swarm of celestial dragons, coalescing into a relentless barrage aimed straight at the Ark. Each wave crackled with enough force to obliterate anything in its path. On the ship's deck, Tony Stark and Captain Marvel braced themselves, eyes blazing with resolve. They unleashed a devastating combination of laser beams, photon blasts, and kinetic energy strikes, throwing everything they had at the oncoming Chi torrent. But the Saiyans' power proved overwhelming. The Chi waves smashed against the Ark's shields like a merciless tide, each impact rippling violently through the hull. The entire vessel trembled as if it might be torn apart at any moment. Inside, terrified passengers gripped handrails and seats, faces pale, bracing for the worst. Yet in the face of such destruction, Tony and Carol refused to back down. They knew the lives of everyone aboard depended on them. Gritting his teeth, Tony recalibrated his repulsors for maximum output, while Carol soared forward, summoning every ounce of photon energy in her veins. Side by side, they formed an unbreakable bulwark between the onslaught and the innocent lives sheltered within the Ark. Not a single Chi wave would breach their defense, not if they could stop it themselves. Energized blasts tore through the void, laser beams, photon shocks, even raw energy strikes, all colliding with the Saiyans' rippling Qigong waves in midair. The force of that clash eclipsed every battle before. The sky itself seemed to shudder under the onslaught, rent open by thunderous eruptions that revealed a maelstrom of darkness beyond. Aboard the Ark, Captain Marvel and Tony Stark fought desperately to stabilize the ship's faltering trajectory. Beside them, Ethan channeled every ounce of courage he possessed, rerouting power through emergency conduits, reinforcing shields, and directing drones to shore up weakened bulkheads. Against the Saiyans' unparalleled might, the Ark looked doomed, yet some unseen guardian force held it together. Sweat and determination drove their efforts. Ethan risked circuit overloads to bolster the deflectors, while Tony's quick diagnostics and Carol's cosmic energy blasts pushed back the enemy's tide. Together, their combined faith and grit formed an unbreakable barrier, preserving both the Ark and the countless innocent lives it carried. Far above the fray, Loki and Ultron observed the chaos. They had come ready to strike in the turmoil, but even their cold ambitions faltered at the Saiyans' raw power. As the battle raged on, they realized this confrontation had grown far beyond anything they, or the universe, had ever seen. Ethan and Ultron knew full well they were no match for the Saiyans. Remaining in the open was a death sentence, so the two slipped away in silence, desperate to put distance between themselves and their ruthless hunters. But their attempt at a quiet retreat did not go unnoticed. Vegeta and Nappa's scouters immediately registered movement. The power level that had sat stubbornly at 6,000 began to drop as the pair fled. "Running away?" Vegeta drawled, his voice low and laced with amusement. He watched the scouters' readout with a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips, as though he found the very idea of escape laughable. In his eyes, Ethan and Ultron were no more significant than insects scrambling for cover under a magnifying glass. Nappa chuckled, shaking his head in contempt. "Do they really think they can outrun us?" he scoffed. To the Saiyan mind, strength alone dictated the natural order. The weak bowed to the strong, and any attempt at defiance or flight was ultimately pointless. They fancied themselves the universe's supreme warrior race, looking down on anyone who dared challenge them. They should have recognized the vast chasm between their power and ours, Vegeta said coldly, his eyes gleaming with contempt. He watched Loki and Ultron struggling to flee. Even if they managed to put some distance between them, escape would be futile. At least, that's what Vegeta believed. But what truly excited the Saiyans was the chance to trample a fallen rival, especially one whose strength surpassed their own. Nappa practically vibrated with anticipation at the thought of closing in on their quarry and crushing them to demonstrate Saiyan supremacy. "Let them run," Vegeta ordered, reclining casually. There was no need to rush. Instead, he focused on the scouters' readout, tracking the fluctuating power levels of Loki and Ultron. A cruel smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Their power may be impressive on paper," he mused, "but their escape speed is pathetic. We just need to tail them at a steady pace. Eventually, we'll close the gap." Even without Raditz, Vegeta and Nappa had no intention of letting Loki and Ultron slip away. The two villains had already rounded up a dozen or more fighters whose power levels all registered in the double digits, clearly the core elite of the human contingent. By comparison, the arc cruiser that Tony Stark and Captain Marvel were defending barely registered 1 or 2 power points, perhaps even 0. To Loki and Ultron, this ship and the people aboard was infinitely more valuable. "They're using a decoy to lure us off," Vegeta snarled. "They want to protect their real assets." "Then let's show them despair," Nappa agreed, nodding grimly. With that, the Saiyans fell back and began their pursuit, keeping just enough distance to stay hidden while ensuring they could strike at a moment's notice. But as Vegeta and Nappa maneuvered into position, Tony and Captain Marvel spotted them closing in. They watched in disbelief as Vegeta and Nappa broke off their assault and streaked past them, hot on the trail of Rocky and Ultron. Tony Stark's brow furrowed. What the hell just happened? Moments ago, the two Saiyans had seemed hell-bent on leveling the Ark. Now they'd abandoned the attack as if someone else suddenly mattered more. "I've never seen anything like it," Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, admitted, shaking her head. As seasoned warriors, they both knew how relentless Saiyans could be. This hesitation, this U-turn, was completely out of character. Tony exhaled, a flush of relief warming his chest. They just managed to stabilize the Ark's failing systems, but against 2 power-crazy Saiyan princes, they'd felt helpless. If Vegeta and Nappa truly meant to leave them alone, well, that was the best news they could hope for. "Do you think it's because we gave up on Earth?" Tony ventured. "Raditz did say he came for the planet in the first place." Carol watched the distant figures racing across the barren landscape. "It's possible. If the Saiyans decided the real prize lies elsewhere, it would explain why they're not bothering with us anymore." Tony nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the retreating silhouettes. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. For now. Chapter 577. Vibranium Raditz. "But our highest priority right now is stabilizing the Ark's trajectory and ensuring she reaches her destination safely," Captain Marvel said, her voice calm but resolute. She shot a determined look at Ethan. Though the Saiyans had broken off their pursuit, for the moment, the threat still hung over them. Only by securing the Ark could they truly protect the innocent souls on board. Ethan didn't reply. He merely tightened his grip on the diagnostic scanner and dove back into the maintenance tunnel beside her. Together, they wove through the cramped corridors, stopping at each malfunctioning module. With practiced efficiency, they ran system checks, swapped out damaged circuitry, realigned guidance gyros, and sealed every breach in the hull plating. Hissing steam and sparking wires didn't deter them. Failure simply wasn't an option. All the while, they kept a constant eye on the sensor readouts. Every minute that passed without the telltale blips of the Saiyans drew a cautious sigh from them both. Still, neither lowered their guard. The moment they relaxed, the enemy could swoop back in. Hours drifted by in a blur of alerts and repairs. Then, finally, the main display flickered from flashing warnings to a steady green. The detector's screen was empty, as if Visigoth and his warriors had vanished into the void. Ethan allowed himself a brief, hopeful exhale. Captain Marvel placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a small, encouraging smile. "It looks like they've really disengaged," she said quietly. "For now, at least." Ethan nodded, returning her smile with one of his own. "Let's finish the last checks and get this Ark back on course." With renewed purpose, they pressed on, determined to see their mission through and to protect every life entrusted to them. Tony Stark and Carol Danvers stared in astonishment as the Saiyan fleet abruptly broke off the chase, their massive ships veering away into the void. They had no idea why the attackers had given up pursuit, but they weren't about to question their good fortune. For now, at least, they were safe, and that bought them time to repair the Ark. Questions nagged at both of them, but there was no time to dwell on mysteries. Their priority was simple: get this ship back in working order and back on course. Only then could they deliver the Ark's precious passengers to safety and keep innocent lives out of the Saiyans' crosshairs. Tony crouched by a ruptured power conduit and ran a diagnostic on his handheld scanner. His face went pale. "Carol, it's worse than I thought." He pointed to a section of shattered circuitry. "Several core systems are totally destroyed. We can't rig this in mid-flight." He rose, exasperated and worried. "If we can't fix her up here, our only option is to land." Carol folded her arms, adrenaline surging. "Where, Tony?" "The nearest planets we've scanned are uninhabitable." Tony tapped at the navigation display, zooming in on a cluster of borderline temperate worlds. "None of these are perfect, but we'll choose the least hostile-looking one. We don't have a choice. Time is running out, and I'd rather risk an uneasy landing than watch this ship tear itself apart." Carol nodded grimly. Every second brought the threat of a Saiyan counterattack closer. Together, they turned back to the Ark's control panels. Whatever lay ahead, they had to make it count, if they hoped to keep everyone aboard alive. Tony's voice cut through the tense hum of the starship's engines. "All right, everyone, let's move." The crew snapped into action. One team set to work repairing the damaged reactor, another reprogrammed the flight trajectory, and a third monitored the ship's vital systems. Though anxiety gnawed at their guts, each person knew that only by pressing on could they keep hope alive. No sooner had they begun than two blazing key signatures streaked into view. Vegeta and Nappa had closed the distance to Loki's and Ultron's escape pod. Even at full thrust, Loki and Ultron couldn't outrun the Saiyan warriors. Within seconds, Vegeta hovered, a mere arm's length from the fragile pod. Vegeta's lip curled in a sneer. "You're quick," he drawled, "but speed alone won't save you." Nappa thumped his fist against his palm. "Yeah, tell me, how did we catch up so fast?" In the command module, Luoji's face went pale. She squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them again in disbelief. "How did they track us?" she blurted. "They'd covered the hull in anti-radar coating and reinforced it with a vibranium shell. No sensor should have picked up their trail. Yet here were two of the universe's fiercest warriors, hot on their heels. The question reverberated through her mind as the ship lurched under an incoming energy blast. There was no more time to wonder, only action remained. Ultron stood motionless for a moment, the soft glow of his facial sensors flickering as he ran countless tactical simulations. Despite every precaution they'd taken to conceal their position, it was clear they'd been found. "We can't run," he admitted, his metallic voice tinged with frustration. Ethan's heart sank at the confirmation. Ahead of them, Two Saiyan warriors flexed their muscles, their auras crackling with barely contained energy. Escape was out of the question. "Then we fight," Ultron declared, turning to Ethan. His tone was calm but resolute. "Brace yourself." Ethan drew in a steadying breath and tapped into his own reserves of strength. At his side, Ultron's processors hummed, scanning every nuance of their opponent's stances, searching desperately for the smallest opening. Only by exploiting a weakness, any weakness, could they hope to survive this encounter. Pressure built in Ethan's chest, but alongside it came determination. Surrender would not be an option. They would stand their ground. Rocky drew a steady breath, bracing himself for a fight to the death against the two Saiyans. "Let Raditz handle this," Ultron called out to Loki. "Give me a shot. Maybe I can bring these Saiyans under control." Luoji still gripped the forged spirit scepter that Ethan had crafted long ago. Though Ethan had siphoned away the Infinity Stone's power, Loki's staff had never housed the Mind Stone. Ultron's gaze flickered nervously toward the scepter. He'd always feared Luoji might seize command of him. Even after transplanting his consciousness into a Saiyan body, Ultron had installed a failsafe chip. If his data ever glitched, the system would automatically reboot and wipe his memories clean, leaving Luoji powerless to override him. Then Raditz appeared. Vegeta and Nappa came to an abrupt halt, stunned. They never expected to see their former comrade alive. "Raditz?" they uttered in perfect unison, disbelief etched across their faces. How could this weakling they once dismissed still be standing? Weren't the Earthlings supposed to have killed him? Raditz strode into view, wearing a brand-new battlesuit forged from sound-absorbing steel. Not only was it virtually indestructible, it also muffled his every movement, making him all but invisible on the battlefield. His eyes blazed with a fierce confidence and determination, an unmistakable change from the man he'd once been. Thanks to the Cradle of Life technology, his shattered body had been fully repaired and now infused with vibranium cells that had dramatically amplified his strength. Nable's power scanner chirped in astonishment. 6,000? He muttered, staring at the display. Raditz's combat power had shot all the way up to 6,000, an almost unbelievable figure. Jealousy and suspicion warred in Nable's expression as he glared across at Vegeta. "What's going on here, Vegeta?" Vegeta folded his arms, his brow tight with frustration. He shook his head, unable to make sense of it himself. "I can't explain it," he admitted quietly. "Raditz's power spike, it's off the charts. I don't know how or why." Raditz's lips curved into a cold smirk as he addressed the two Saiyan princes. "Vegeta, Nable, it's been a while, hasn't it?" A chill passed through the air as Vegeta's eyes narrowed to slits. "Raditz," he growled, "did you betray you?" Chapter 5:8, Raditz versus Napal. "Betray?" Raditz snarled, the word dripping with contempt as though it were a bad joke. "No, you've got it all wrong. I haven't betrayed anyone. I've simply discovered my true purpose, pledged myself to my master, and become his warrior." Vegeta and Napal exchanged stunned glances. Raditz claimed to be an Earthling's champion? Both elite Saiyan warriors by birth and training, they had always believed themselves the pinnacle of the universe's fighters. How could these feeble humans possibly control one of their own? Yet Raditz's altered strength, his unfamiliar battle armor, and that unshakable confidence told a different story. There was more behind his transformation than they had ever imagined. Napal's lip curled in disgust. "How pathetic, to think you've been dancing on Earth's strings." But even as his words dripped with scorn, both Saiyans felt a chill. Raditz was no longer the reckless sibling they once knew. He'd become something new and far more dangerous. A cold light gleamed in Vegeta's eyes as he fixed his gaze on Raditz, as if daring him to flinch. As the Saiyan prince, he had endured the harshest training from infancy, nurturing an insatiable hunger for strength and an utter contempt for weakness. He would not suffer any slight against his people, nor could he forgive a former comrade reduced to the role of Earthling lackey. "Answer me, Raditz," Vegeta said through clenched teeth. "What have these Earthlings done to deserve your loyalty? Why would you serve them?" Nappa's eyes flickered with greed. He had begun to regard the inhabitants of Earth in a new light. Vegeta said nothing, but the same calculating spark danced in his own eyes. The two Saiyans exchanged a loaded look, shock mingled with avarice. If the secret of these Earthlings' newfound power could be unraveled, their own strength would increase tenfold. Raditz straightened, pride swelling in his chest. You just don't understand. The power I wield comes from my master. Power beyond anything you've ever dreamed of. Vegeta's expression hardened. He stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Your master? Who is this being you speak of? Raditz threw back his head and laughed, every syllable dripping with self-assurance. You don't need to know my master's name, he taunted. Soon enough, you'll be groveling at his feet as his slaves. Vegeta and Nappa exchanged a fierce glare, their pride stung by the insult. Raditz had betrayed the Saiyan cause, and now he had the nerve to mock them. I haven't seen you two in ages, Raditz continued, sneering. I almost forgot how arrogant and weak you are. You've let your little victories go to your heads, blind to how far you've fallen behind me. I'm an elite warrior. I'm not like that worthless trash you cling to. Nappa's lips curled into a cruel grin. Cut the crap, Raditz. Let's show you what elite really means. Vegeta's eyes burned with barely contained fury. Enough talk. Let's rip him apart. With a confident nod, Nappa cracked his knuckles. A power level of 6,000? Child's play. They were more than ready. Ethan had been wary of facing someone with a rumored 6,000 power level, but the instant he realized his opponent was Raditz, he couldn't help but relax. With his own strength hovering around 4,000, Ethan figured Raditz would be no real challenge. In the blink of an eye, Ethan blurred forward, leaving only a faint afterimage behind. Like a bolt of lightning cleaving the sky, he appeared before Raditz and threw a devastating punch, every ounce of his power focused into that single blow, enough, he believed, to shatter his rival. Raditz, however, was unfazed. A smirk curled his lips as he shifted his weight and slipped the attack with casual ease. Nice speed, he drawled, eyes glittering with contempt, but you're sorely lacking in power. Ethan's jaw clenched at the taunt, surprise flashing in his eyes at Raditz's unexpected agility. He refused to back down. With renewed intensity, he launched a furious barrage of punches and kicks, each strike crackling with lethal intent as he pressed his assault. Ethan's attacks came in a relentless barrage, but Raditz slipped through every strike with ease, dodging, weaving, and countering at will. Each failed blow only seemed to invite more mockery. Is that all you've got, Ethan? Raditz drawled, his grin cruel. His barbed words stung, igniting a furious blaze in Ethan's chest. With a roar, Ethan surged forward, gathering every scrap of strength he had. This time he was faster, fiercer, like a storm unleashed. When his fist met Raditz's side, the collision rang out like a bomb going off. The shockwave rippled down the street, shattering windows and uprooting debris. Ethan's eyes burned with determination as he wound up for another strike, only to find his fist suddenly trapped in Raditz's iron grip. Raditz stood as solid as a mountain. A weak punch for a weak fighter, he sneered, tightening his hold. Is this your power? Enraged, Ethan tore his arm free and launched himself back into the fray. They clashed in midair, fists like thunderbolts, kicks like cracking whips, each impact rocking the very air around them. With a bellow, Ethan threw a haymaker straight at Raditz's chest, but the punch found something far tougher than flesh. It was as if he'd struck living rock. The blow rebounded, sending a white-hot pain screaming through his arm. What? Ethan gasped, staring in disbelief at his throbbing limb. The seed of doubt flickered in his mind, but he refused to let it grow. This fight was far from over. Ethan's punch felt like a drop in the ocean, utterly insignificant against Raditz. Raditz's sound-absorbing steel suit swallowed the blow's energy and then expelled it as a shockwave, leaving Ethan to taste the full force of his own strike. Between the suit's defenses and the vibranium cells coursing through his body, Raditz treated Ethan's attack like a mere tickle. As if expecting it, Raditz sidestepped with razor-sharp precision, and Ethan's fist cut only empty air. In a heartbeat, Raditz was behind him. What? Ethan never saw the next blow coming. A devastating fist slammed into his back, and agony exploded through him. Ah! He howled as his body flew backward like a kite on snapped line. With bone-shaking force, he plowed into a nearby building, reducing steel beams and concrete to rubble in a single, crushing impact. Chapter 579, Vegeta Takes Action. Dust and gravel still floated in the air, the ground around them gouged and cracked by the force of their last assault. Naba lay sprawled among the ruins, his skin ashen, his breathing shallow and ragged. His eyes blazed with anger and disbelief. How had he fallen so utterly? A few meters away, Raditz watched him with icy contempt, a mocking grin tugging at his lips. "Is that all you've got?" he sneered. "Pathetic." At the insult, something in Naba snapped. He forced himself to his knees, then, with a groan of effort, staggered to his feet. Blood trickled down his battered armor, but his gaze remained unbowed. "I'm not finished yet," he shouted, every word dripping with defiance. "I won't accept defeat." Raditz only chuckled. In the blink of an eye, he vanished, and reappeared inches from Naba. His movement was a blur, faster than lightning, leaving no time for his opponent to brace himself. Raditz struck before Naba could react, the impact sending shockwaves through the devastated landscape. Note, this excerpt demonstrates the raw ferocity of the battle's aftermath. Though Naba refuses to yield, Raditz seizes the advantage in a flash. Elsewhere on the field, Vegeta senses the disturbance and begins to move. Ethan's fist struck Naba's chest with brutal force. Bang! A thunderous crack echoed as Naba's ribs collapsed inward, and a fountain of blood spurted from his mouth. He was slammed backward like a broken kite, crashing to the ground in a heavy heap. This time, he didn't rise. Sprawled face up, Naba stared at the sky through hollow, defeated eyes. Despair and disbelief warred in his heart. He couldn't accept that he'd been beaten so utterly by Ethan. Ethan stood over him, expression hard and unyielding, as if surveying a corpse. "What a waste," he muttered coldly, already indifferent to Naba's fate. From a distance, Vegeta watched, his face darkening with anger and disappointment. He had banked on Naba's skill to rival Ethan's, but instead, the elite fighter lay broken and bleeding. Even with Ethan's 2,000-point advantage, Vegeta couldn't hide how shocked he was to see Naba defeated so decisively. Vegeta stared down at Naba with barely concealed contempt. In his eyes, Naba was a liability, unworthy of calling himself a Saiyan, let alone standing by Vegeta's side in battle. A part of him wanted nothing more than to kill the weakling on the spot, but he forced himself to hold back. This wasn't the old Dragon Ball timeline. He still needed Naba's power to crush Earth's defenders and secure the Dragon Balls for himself. Once he'd claimed immortality, Naba would once again be expendable, but not yet. "Vegeta, please help me." Naba's voice cracked with panic. "Get out of my way, scum!" Vegeta snapped, his disdain echoing in the air. He took a steadying breath, pushing down the fury roiling inside him, and shifted his cold gaze to the battlefield. On the sidelines, Loki watched with rapt attention, her lips curved in a faint, eager smile. Ultron stood beside her, eyes alight with disbelief and excitement. They'd both underestimated Raditz, assuming even 2 Saiyans could overpower him. How wrong they'd been. "Raditz is that powerful?" Ultron muttered, marveling at the destruction unfolding before them. Loki said nothing, but her expression said it all. In this chaos, she saw the future, and it was hers to command. The 2 Saiyans' power was staggering, but against all odds, Raditz had just defeated one of them. Could he topple the other as well? And if not, surely Ultron's hidden Saiyan army would finish the job. Loki sat quietly, feigning composure while her heart thundered in her chest. This was exactly as she'd planned, using Raditz's might to eliminate the greatest threats. Confidence flooded her. Our scheme is on the verge of succeeding, she thought. She'd orchestrated every detail. First, Raditz would take down Vegeta and Nappa. Then, with her own Saiyan Legion unleashed, she would seize control of Earth. Now it was all falling into place. All that remained, was for Raditz to finish Vegeta, and victory would be hers. At Loki's signal, Ultron sent his mass-produced Saiyan soldiers streaming forward to support Raditz. Vegeta's eyes widened in shock at the seemingly endless ranks of identical warriors. He'd never expected reinforcements like these. Vegeta's gaze swept over the line of Saiyan soldiers before him, and his blood ran cold. Each one looked identical, same armor, same scarred brow, same smug smirk. At first, he'd assumed they were nothing more than the low-ranking foot soldiers of some ragtag mercenary band. But the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Earth's defenders had cloned his own race. "How dare you, Earthlings?" Vegeta snarled, his voice echoing off the shattered walls of the ruined city. Fury coiled in his chest, ready to blast through at any moment. To him, this was more than mere trickery. It was a direct affront to Saiyan honor. Across the debris-strewn plaza, Loki and Ultron watched without flinching. They exchanged a satisfied glance. Their scheme had nearly played out perfectly. Once they crushed the last obstacle, Vegeta himself, they would hold the battlefield, and the fate of Earth would be theirs. With a crack of energy, the Saiyan clones surged forward, led by Raditz. The hulking warrior's grin was all too familiar, a cruel mirror of his brother's smirk. "Come on, big brother," Raditz taunted, barreling into the fray. Despite his bravado, Raditz felt a flicker of unease. He knew how devastating Vegeta could be when truly enraged. Under Ultron's precise orders, wave after wave of cloned Saiyans poured in like tidal fury. Vegeta met them head-on, ki flaring around him in roaring blasts. Each collision shook the ground and sent up clouds of dust. Yet for every clone he incinerated, a dozen more took its place. Amid the chaos, Ethan, once known as Luther, watched from a collapsed archway, fists clenched. He'd trained alongside the true Saiyans, felt the sting of their pride and the power of their blasts. It pained him to see those values stolen and replicated by cold science. But he also knew his moment to strike was coming. If Earth's defenders had a single hope, it lay with him, cutting through the confusion and turning the tide before Vegeta's wrath scorched them all away. Above the roar of battle, Loki's mocking laughter rang out. Ultron activated a scanning array, mapping Vegeta's energy signature and calculating the optimal strike patterns. The mechanical overlord's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Only one obstacle remained. Vegeta hovered amid the carnage, hair spiking with raw power, every muscle trembling with barely contained rage. "I'll show you what happens when you mock the Saiyan name," he bellowed, fists glowing violet. Then, with a savage roar, he unleashed a shockwave that tore through the ranks of clones, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Raditz staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. Ethan seized the opening, launching himself forward with all the speed and precision he could muster. The battlefield held its breath. For better or worse, the next few moments would decide Earth's fate once and for all. They were individually weak, but their strength lay in numbers and coordination. Vegeta sneered at the cloned Saiyan Corp. Hardly worthy opponents, he thought. Gathering a surge of ki, he prepared to wipe them out in one fell swoop. "Go to hell!" he roared, thrusting his palm forward. A colossal wave of energy shot from his hand, tearing through the air and crashing into the ranks of clones. Even though their bodies were reinforced with vibranium cells, they stood no chance against Vegeta's overwhelming power. One by one, they were blasted from the sky, tumbling to the ground like limp sacks. Had their cells not been fortified, Vegeta's strike would have reduced them to ash. Chapter 580, Control. Loki and Ultron stared in stunned silence. The Saiyan army they had painstakingly assembled was supposed to sweep through everything like a hurricane, crushing Vegeta, their most formidable foe, with ease. Instead, the mass-produced Saiyan warriors lay strewn across the battlefield, fragile as grains of sand in the wind. None were dead, but all were immobilized, eyes wide with fear and confusion, unable to comprehend how they had been so effortlessly overwhelmed. Seizing the moment, Raditz bristled with defiance. As one of the Saiyan commanders, he refused to watch Vegeta's display of power go unchecked. Gathering his ki, he blurred forward in a flash of afterimages, charging at the prince. Vegeta merely let out a derisive snort, the contempt clear on his face. "You actually think you can challenge me?" His power level blazed at 18,000, 3 times that of Raditz. Before Raditz could react, Vegeta's figure dissolved into thin air, leaving nothing but a mocking echo of superiority behind. He moved so fast that even Loki and Ultron couldn't keep up. By the time they caught sight of Vegeta again, he'd already appeared in front of Raditz. I watched as Vegeta's fist shot forward, slicing through the air with a cracking whistle. Raditz reacted swiftly, almost in time, but still a fraction too late. All he could do was stare in horror as Vegeta's blow slammed into his jaw. Crack! Raditz was launched backward, crashing into the ground in a shower of gravel. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and pain contorted his features. Earlier, while observing Nappa's fight with Raditz, Vegeta had noticed a flaw in Raditz's armor. It left certain areas, his head and the joints of his hands and feet, exposed and vulnerable. Having pinpointed those weak spots, Vegeta disappeared in a blur and reappeared behind Raditz just in time to strike the back of his skull with full force. Raditz felt as if a massive hammer had smashed into him. His vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges, and he nearly collapsed to the earth. Raditz barely managed to steady himself, every muscle trembling, and braced for a counterstrike, but Vegeta was already on the move. He unleashed a rapid flurry of blows, each strike pinpointing Raditz's weak spots. Raditz could do nothing but absorb the punishment. His battle armor lay in tatters and crimson welts covered his chest and arms. Watching from the sidelines, Loki and Ultron exchanged stunned looks. Neither had expected Vegeta's power to be so overwhelming. Even Raditz, fresh from defeating another Saiyan, was helpless against him. Vegeta loomed over his fallen comrade like a predator surveying a wounded prey, a cruel smirk curling his lips. "Is this what you call the Saiyan army?" he mocked, voice icy. "Pathetic." With Raditz incapacitated, Vegeta turned his attention to the two observers. Loki and Ultron had nowhere to run. Ultron's optics glowed warily. Loki gripped her mind staff, resolve hardening her features. "There's only one option left," Loki whispered, lifting the staff. "We force him to our will." Channeling her telepathic gift, Loki sent out probing waves of mental energy, but Vegeta's will was tight and strong, and she couldn't be certain of victory. As she gauged his defenses, Vegeta sprang forward in the blink of an eye, closing the distance before Loki could mount a proper defense. Ethan moved in a blur, a streak of lightning tearing through the sky. In an instant, his hand shot forward and passed straight through Loki's head. "Huh?" he muttered, momentarily stunned. Meanwhile, Vegeta had fallen prey to Loki's phantom illusion and hadn't even realized where she truly stood. Before he could react, the tip of the Mind Staff grazed his chest. Ethan's modified Mind Scepter normally exerted its power from afar, controlling large groups with a thought, yet Vegeta's strength was on an entirely different level. Fearing a long-distance attempt might fail, Loki had chosen the riskier tactic of direct contact. An invisible wave of psychic energy exploded from the staff and Dove-Eye entered Vegeta's mind. Loki immediately sensed a fragile mental tether forming between them, and she began to weave her will through it, directing his limbs as she willed. But Vegeta's mental defenses towered over those of any ordinary opponent. He felt the intrusion, his eyes snapping open with anger and defiance, and he launched a fierce internal struggle to shake free. For a heartbeat, resistance flared in his expression, only to be snuffed out under the weight of Loki's relentless psychic assault. She could feel her own reserves dwindling, her thoughts growing heavy as she forced her control deeper. Still, she refused to let go, determined to bend Vegeta's will completely to her own. He clenched his teeth, forcing himself to stay focused. If he lost control of Vegeta now, the fallout would be catastrophic. Ultron's onslaught against the Saiyan Prince was laughably weak, mere motes of dust against Vegeta's power, but it served its purpose as a distraction. Exactly what Ethan needed. Vegeta staggered only a heartbeat before the neural collar snapped shut around his neck, overriding his will. "Master!" Vegeta snarled, dropping to one knee and fixing Loki with a glare that shimmered with restrained fury. "Impressive," Loki purred, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Very impressive, Vegeta." Nappa stood at a distance, jaw dropping as he witnessed his friend subdued so effortlessly. Controlled just like that, he thought, shock pinning him in place. Loki's excitement mounted. "There's another Saiyan here," she announced. "He's no Raditz, but he's more than worth adding to our collection." With a flick of her wrist, she ordered Vegeta to seize Nappa. Within seconds, Nappa, too, was shackled by the same mind control device. Behind them, a lone figure watched from the shadows. Freshly suited for battle, Ganada let out a soft whistle. "Well, that saves me an entrance," she murmured to herself, barely hiding her surprise. She'd been anticipating a grand showdown and the tantalizing prospect of capturing two elite Saiyans, but both were already under Loki's command. Ganada ran a hand through her hair and shrugged. Earth's destiny could wait. Her own survival came first. Ethan liked playing the part of an ordinary guy, but he never lost sight of who he really was. As long as the world's balance stayed intact, he was far too apathetic to intervene. His power was simply that overwhelming. Villains who gave other heroes headaches would barely raise an eyebrow from him. A single word, and they'd crumble. Still, Ethan wasn't the blunt type. He preferred to dispatch threats with the same refined silverware his father had provided him. He paid zero attention to Loki's schemes for world domination. Really, he couldn't have cared less. Then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through the quiet. Saiyan! A thunderous boom rent the sky, and in a flash of lightning, Thor landed beside him. Having tracked Tony's distress signal and come up empty-handed in his hunt for the Dark Elves, he'd had no choice but to return to Earth. Chapter 581, The Thunder God at His Zenith. Thor stood watch over the 9 realms from Asgard's highest spire, the weight of his duty pressing on him. Since time immemorial, the 9 worlds had been protected by his realm, and now, fresh alarms stirred in his chest. The Saiyans had returned. He remembered all too well their last assault, savage, relentless warriors whose strength and cruelty had forced even him to stay on constant guard. In comparison, the Dark Elves who once plagued Asgard were barely a nuisance next to the Saiyan threat. Their trickery could be annoying, but their might paled in comparison. Drawing in a steadying breath, Thor summoned the power of his lineage. The Bifrost flared to life, a rainbow-lit bridge spanning worlds, casting him in radiant light that made his already towering form seem even more formidable. With a crackle of raw energy, he stepped across the threshold and vanished. On Earth, Tony Stark and Captain Marvel met him at the ruins of a once bustling city center. Their faces were grave as they relayed the devastation. "Steve's gone," Carol said softly. "He fell during the Saiyans' first wave." Tony's voice was tight with fatigue. "Banner didn't make it either, and most of the Illuminati, they're dead, we're down to the last few." Thor's heart clenched. Steve Rogers, his friend, his comrade, dead. Bruce Banner, the Hulk who'd saved worlds time and again, dead. He gripped his hammer tighter. "Where's Doom?" Thor demanded. Tony shook his head. "Missing. We traced some dark magic signature to an abandoned fortress in Latveria. Whatever Victor's planning, it's bad, and he's not acting alone." Carol laid a hand on Thor's arm. "Stark's intel suggests Doom is attempting to summon a devil from the depths of hell, hoping to bind it, harness its power to turn the tide against the Saiyans." Thor nodded. His storm-forged heart pulsed with renewed resolve. Dark or devilish, no force would conquer Asgard or Earth so long as the Thunder God stood ready. The thunder rolled in his veins. Lightning danced at his fingertips. With the Bifrost still crackling behind him, Thor lifted his hammer high. "Asgard's shield will not falter," he vowed. "I will find Ethan, Dr. Doom's last known ally, and stop this summoning at its source. For the fallen, for all our worlds, I shall unleash the full fury of the storm." He strode forward, the heavens themselves echoing his declaration. The war for the 9 realms, and for Earth, had only just begun. Dr. Doom in this universe bears a striking resemblance to his comic book incarnation. Yet thanks to Ethan, Victor Von Doom was discovered far earlier than expected, and promptly recruited into the Illuminati. Under his mother's guidance, Doom was exposed to the mystic arts from childhood, and now wields magic on par with Doctor Strange. Coupled with his superlative intellect and state-of-the-art technology, he stands toe-to-toe with Iron Man in every field of innovation. Once Thor learned the Saiyans' location, he wasted no time in hunting them down. "Loki?" Thor called out as he stepped into the clearing, halting in mid-stride. His eyes widened in disbelief. Before him stood the familiar face of his brother, yet everything else was changed. This Loki wore flowing robes in soft pastel hues, every movement suffused with a gentle, elegant grace. The mischievous spark Thor remembered, his brother's trademark swagger, was gone, replaced by poised refinement. Thor's brow furrowed. Loki had always been unmistakably male, so why did he appear as a woman now? And what were the Saiyans to him? Ethan might have reshaped Loki's own perception of gender, but neither Odin nor Thor had been altered. What new trickery was this? Ethan had convinced himself for as long as he could remember that he'd been born a girl. His parents knew the truth, but they maintained the charade, and even Thor never suspected otherwise. Now, standing on the wind-swept plateau before the Saiyan camp, Ethan's brow furrowed. He glanced at his brother, so earnest, so unsuspecting, and felt a flicker of something like regret. He shut it down and let indifference take its place. "Thor," he said coolly, voice echoing over the battlefield. "What are you doing here?" Thor straightened, anger flashing in his blue eyes. He didn't bother answering Ethan's question. Instead, he said, "I don't know why you've thrown in with these Saiyans, but they're our sworn enemies. You can't stand beside them." Ethan laughed, a low, sharp sound. "Enemies? From where I'm standing, you're the enemy. Shock registered on Thor's face. He had always taken their bond for granted, never dreamed that his brother would turn on him. Ethan, you've got it all wrong, he began, reaching out. Ethan cut him off with a cold smile. Vegeta, he commanded, raising a gloved hand. Kill him. In the tense silence that followed, Thor stared at Ethan in disbelief. Then terror flickered behind his eyes, not just fear for his life, but grief for the brother he thought he knew. Ethan felt nothing. All that mattered was the throne. With Thor out of the way, he would claim his right as co-lord of the 9 realms. Only Vegeta remained unscathed. The other Saiyan warriors lay scattered, unconscious from their last skirmish. Finish him, Ethan repeated, voice calm and unwavering. Vegeta drew his blade. As Thor braced himself, Ethan turned away, already calculating the political fallout of fratricide and the unchallenged power that would be his alone. Vegeta lifted his hand and, with a single motion, unleashed a massive wave of chi that stretched across the sky like an impenetrable curtain. The energy roared with the force of annihilation, threatening to swallow the entire battlefield. To Thor, it felt as though he were staring down the Rainbow Bridge itself, an irresistible crashing tide. But instead of flinching, Thor's fighting spirit flared to life. He inhaled deeply, summoning the thunderous power that pulsed in his blood and the roar of the 9 realms chanting his name. His grip tightened around his axe, and in that instant, countless streaks of lightning erupted into being, coalescing into a single, devastating surge. Thor's eyes burned with determination as he hefted the axe and unleashed its full might. Lightning danced across the blade, forging a brilliant shaft of energy that cleaved the air. The thunder-infused beam collided with Vegeta's chi wave in a cataclysmic meeting of forces. Time itself seemed to pause, then everything ignited in a blinding burst of light, as bright as a midday sun, shaking the earth beneath them. I couldn't look directly at the blinding light that suddenly flooded the entire battlefield. Then came a thunderous roar that shook me to my core, so powerful the ground beneath us trembled as if about to give way. Through the glare, I saw Thor's axe cleave the advancing chi wave like a blade through silk. In an instant, the surging energy folded and collapsed under the strike, exploding into countless shimmering fragments, brilliant as fireworks, and just as fleeting. Vegeta, Loki, and Ultron stood frozen, their eyes locked on Thor's weapon as it split that overwhelming power with breathtaking ease. I felt a wave of dread wash over us all. Vegeta's pupils constricted as he sensed the raw force behind Thor's blow, yet instead of yielding, he wrapped himself in a fresh layer of energy, bracing for the next onslaught. Thor simply sneered. In a flash of crackling lightning, he reappeared before Vegeta, Stormbringer held firmly in both hands. Thunder danced across the sky, illuminating his determined gaze, equal parts contempt for his foes and unshakable faith in his own might. I swallowed hard, knowing we were about to witness a clash unlike any other. Ethan's forearms were like bands of iron and stone, veins standing out as if he were about to pour every ounce of his strength into the axe in his hands. He drew in a deep, roaring breath, his chest heaving like a storm-tossed sea, and with a guttural shout, unleashed the weapon in a single, thunderous swing. The blade crackled with sky-forged energy as it cleaved through the air, driving straight toward Vegeta. Across the arena, Vegeta let loose a mighty roar of his own, an unmistakable display of Saiyan pride and power that reverberated like crashing thunder. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened, every muscle coiled to channel his raw strength. When Ethan's thunder-charged axe met Vegeta's crushing blow, the impact erupted in a cataclysmic wave of energy. Brilliant light flooded the battlefield, illuminating every corner of the space as the shockwave ripped through the surrounding air. Dust and debris spun outward in a violent frenzy, testament to the titanic force of their clash.